Chapter 2442. This formation of Tulan is truly amazing. I don't know where they got this kind of cultivator from, but he delayed our plan by several decades. If it weren't for the Patriarch personally overseeing it this time, I'm afraid this expedition would have ended in failure. The formation is dead, but people are alive. The formation is indeed amazing, but that Taoist is also very impressive. No matter how many times he dealt with it, there wasn't much of a mistake. If it weren't for him, this formation could have been broken in 10 years. Why wait until today? With the Patriarch taking action, I don't think it will take much longer. There are only a few layers left in this formation. It's useless no matter who comes. It's just that when the formation is broken, these Tulan cultivators might not be willing to keep their promise. Outside the mountain-protecting formation, hundreds of cultivators were densely packed in the sky. In the center was an old man with a sage-like demeanor. He was the realm-suppressing patriarch of the Kongjia world, Xiaoguan. The entire Kongjia world had relied entirely on his own strength in the past 10,000 years. It could be said that he represented the Kongjia world. His words carried weight, and he was a man of his word. The perfected lords of the Kongjia world surrounded the Patriarch. They were flattering him and learning some practical skills at the same time. Over the past few decades, the formation that they couldn't decipher had gradually revealed its true colors under the ancestors' painstaking efforts. They knew that the ancestor had deliberately slowed down in order to let them learn more things. With such an ancestor, why should they worry about not being able to achieve great things? Taoist Xiaoguan's expression was normal. Between his fingers, it was as if he was peeling off 1,000 layers of skin, peeling off another layer of the formation's protection. He chuckled and said, "This is already the 10001 st anomaly of this formation. I've observed its momentum. The changes have ended, and there isn't much novelty to speak of. The opportunity to break the formation is today." Everyone cheered in unison, and all kinds of flattery rolled in. The old half-immortal smiled helplessly. Cultivators of our generation should have lofty ambitions. Every step and action must have a purpose. We can't just focus on what's in front of us. This is also the root of our Kongjia world's 4 transitions in the past 10,000 years. Everyone listened attentively. They knew that the Patriarch liked to be a teacher, and there was indeed something real. It was not wrong to say a few nice words. The roots of this mountain-protecting formation come from the inner circle cultivation world. It's very extraordinary. I think it's also from the Orthodox Taoist sect. However, this person wasn't invited by the Tulans. He just happened to wander here by chance. It's just a coincidence, and it can't happen again. Seeing that the disciples around him were listening to him attentively, the old ancestor was very satisfied. In the past few decades, I've had several discussions with this person, so I vaguely know his background. It was a top-level higher realm of the northern elephant heaven, and for some unknown reason, it had drifted here. However, although this person's orthodoxy domain was strong, it was nothing in the mainstream of the inner circle. Especially among the peak half-immortals, there were no particularly outstanding figures. Therefore, if I used my strength to suppress him, there would be no worries. You must be clear about this in the future. The world of cultivation is complicated and complicated. If we are not careful, we will offend someone we should not offend. Our behavior is not recognized in the mainstream world of cultivation. Therefore, we have to be especially careful and cautious. Otherwise, it will be too late for regrets when disaster strikes. The cultivators of the Kongjia realm bowed and accepted the teachings. Old Ancestor Guan sighed, "If you don't walk into the mainstream, you will never know how big this universe is. Only with a humble heart can one go far. Don't think that just because you've succeeded 4 times, you'll continue to succeed in the future. The closer you are to the inner circle, the more cautious you have to be." This was a wise saying, and it was also the reason why they had been able to walk all the way without any accidents. Old Ancestor Guan waved his hand. Of course, wealth comes from danger. Nothing good will fall from the sky. If you don't fight for it, you won't have anything. Once the target is determined, you have to do your best and leave no room for leeway. Take this foreign Yang god for example. After our Kongjia realm wins the bet, others can live, but not him. No matter where he comes from or what his roots are, only a dead person is the best enemy. In the mainstream world of cultivation, there is also such a domain called the Five Rings. Along the way, they plunder and rob. Now, it has become the wind vane of the change of epochs. Therefore, I say that plundering is not wrong. What's wrong is that you don't have the ability to do so. I hope that one day, our Kongjia realm's Taoist field can also command the wind and the clouds and spread our might throughout the universe. The cultivators of the Kongjia realm were in high spirit. In the past 10,000 years, they had vaguely formed a certain temperament, an aggressive temperament. However, this temperament still needed to be settled and polished. Feeling that the time had come, old Ancestor Guan stood up. I deliberately slowed down the speed of breaking the formation for 3 reasons. First, this person does have some ability and is not an ordinary person. On the Great Tao, you must remember to never underestimate your opponent, even if their realm is lower than yours. Second, it can let you learn the way of breaking the formation more clearly. I have already demonstrated the various changes in it for decades. If you still can't learn it, it can only mean that you are not cut out for cultivation. You can't blame anyone. Third, it is a psychological attack. If you break the formation too quickly, it will be easy to arouse their desire to resist. In a life and death struggle, there will be too many unnecessary injuries. Although they still won't bow their heads and admit defeat now, I'm afraid they will still struggle after losing the bet. However, decades have passed, and with the oath of the bet, how much determination can they have even if they struggle? The cultivators of the Kongjia realm were convinced. As long as the old ancestor was here, they would have good days ahead. However, what if the old ancestor was gone one day? Just like before, when he suddenly disappeared for 2,000 years. Although they didn't dare to ask, it wasn't a good thing. The old ancestor was now a 4th blight powerhouse and still had a few thousand years of lifespan. Hopefully, there would be someone among them who could replace him. The old ancestor of the lower pass soared into the sky, and a large group of Kongjia realm cultivators followed closely behind. They came to the top of the formation and tightly blocked the sky. The lower pass waved his hand, and a concave formation appeared out of thin air in the sky. His voice resounded throughout the realm as he laughed. Breaking the formation for decades is actually as easy as waving my hand. I have given you enough face, and I have also done my best in the Battle of Realms. However, there is no such thing as kindness in cultivation. I have given you face, but have you given me face? In fact, waving his hand was a little boastful. Under the premise that the spirit veins were not damaged, it was really difficult for him to solve it with a wave of his hand. However, after decades of thorough research, breaking the formation was really as easy as waving his hand to him now. The foreplay was over and time had passed. Now was the time to boost the morale of the Kongjia realm. Breaking the formation in one go was the best way. The concave formation was embedded downwards, and the formation was reversed. Like the autumn wind sweeping away fallen leaves, the formation that came from the mainstream cultivation world's orthodox Taoist sect disappeared under the huge gap between realms. Inside the formation, the faces of the Tulan cultivators were all ashen. They no longer had any concealment. The old ancestor of the lower pass shook his sleeves. What do you all say? One of the Tulan cultivators stood out, his face full of helplessness as he shook his head repeatedly. This friend of his was already a few thousand years old, but he still liked to pretend so much. He had to drag the matter of solving the problem to the end. He said lazily, Say chicken feathers, Look back and tell me what you have to say. Chapter 2443. The cultivators from the Kongjia world were amused. Is this a street fight in the mortal world? You hit me with a brick every time I turn my head? The patriarch of the lower pass was indifferent. His senses were so sensitive that he could sense all the cultivators within a certain range. Therefore, he was sure that there was no one behind him who could threaten him. It was just the Yuanying of the Kongjia world's perfected cultivators. However, the hundreds of Saturn cultivators who were facing him were all surprised and excited. Was it because they were happy? They were all acting so well. It didn't seem like they were faking it. Did the Saturnians change their profession to stage plays? They weren't acting. They really saw it. For a moment, everyone understood why the person with a poor sense of direction insisted on stalling for time. It was not meaningless persistence, but waiting for the legendary figure he mentioned. Before the cultivators from the Kongjia world invaded, almost everyone here had been to the thunder pool of high density and stayed with the person with a poor sense of direction for a short time. In fact, it was not for the legendary figure, but to keep the person with a poor sense of direction. Now, the good news was that the legendary figure was finally here. The crisis of Toulon was probably not a problem. They were all half-immortals, so they had to respect each other, right? The bad news was that since the legendary figure was here, the person with a poor sense of direction would leave. The Kongjia world was trying its best to get into the inner circle of the universe. If there was a mainstream cultivation environment, who would be willing to waste their time in such a remote place like Toulon? But this was not what they needed to consider at the moment. They were now excited that they could finally see a battle of the highest level in the human cultivation world. The patriarch of the lower pass was very calm because he believed in his senses. But he could do it without turning his head, but the Yuanying perfected cultivators under his command couldn't do it. Once there was a first, there would be a second. While gasping in surprise, a perfected cultivator quietly reminded him, "Patriarch, there are really two people behind us." Pretending to be mysterious. It seemed that if he didn't teach them a lesson, they wouldn't stop playing tricks like this. The patriarch of the lower pass couldn't ignore the warning from the disciple beside him. He slowly turned his head, as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. There were two people, but in fact there was only one. The Yuanying was not worth mentioning. Although he was not familiar with this person, he was very familiar with him. In the exterior realm, in the land of the Yellow Dragon, there was no one who did not know of him. He couldn't understand why this god of death would appear here. It didn't make any sense. The universe was so big and the outer circle was so vast. The human population was sparse, and it was a cultivation desert. However, he understood extremely clearly that everything was over, including the expansion of Kongming realm, as well as himself. The cultivators of the Kongjia realm also realized something, but they did not realize how serious the threat was. At most, it would be a half-immortal. With the old ancestor's fourth blight ability, wouldn't it be easy to deal with him? Among the people present, perhaps only Lu Xiaoyi and Xiaoguan could truly understand what was going on. Perhaps even someone with a poor sense of direction could understand something? However, the thousands of true immortals and nascent souls on both sides did not understand. Excitement began to ripple through their bodies. The boring attack and defense of the formation had tortured them for decades. Now, they were finally going to have an evenly matched battle. This was the best ending. It was a perfect ending. Saturn's history would forever record this heavy stroke as a legacy. Xiaoguan couldn't defend himself, and there was suffering. The matter was clearly laid out here. Any explanation would be superfluous. It was better not to explain and wait for the judgment of fate. Lu Xiaoyi was almost done with his pretense. He ignored Yun Qianqian, who was trembling with excitement or fear, and said lightly, "Before the new era, harmony was precious. It's better to fight less and follow the will of heaven. Children, it's better to go back." The void is endless and unpredictable. As for you, you should end your own life. It's also considered as us working together in the exterior realm. Aren't these words too arrogant? You want a fourth blight mighty person to end his own life with just one sentence? Do you think you're an immortal? Even immortals need to listen to other people's explanations, right? Is this a bluff? Nearly 1,000 cultivators were suspicious and amused by the stranger's big words. They didn't know how he was going to end this. However, as one of the main characters, Xiaoguan, who was also a half-immortal, bowed solemnly. Thank you for your understanding. If you can't do it, you'll be punished. I'll make some arrangements and then I'll be on my way. He waved his hand and called the cultivators of the Kongjia world together. He had a relieved expression on his face. He knew that he would have such a day sooner or later, but he didn't expect to meet this person. Any resistance was superfluous and would only bring about a destructive blow to the power of the Kongjia world. This was proven by countless events in the history of cultivation in the past 2,000 years. Looking at the disciples who were still confused, he smiled bitterly and said, "My path is over, but yours is just the beginning. You have to pay attention to every word I say and remember it carefully. You can't disobey." After a while, Xiaoguan finished his arrangements. In front of nearly 1,000 cultivators from both sides, he didn't show them any extraordinary Taoist skills or fierce battle. Instead, he showed them the grandest and most beautiful fireworks in history. So, this is how a half-immortal's Taoism dissipates? Under the stunned gazes of the cultivators of the Kongjia world, the cultivators of the Kongjia world collected the remains of their ancestor, saluted, and left silently. They were ordered to give up the transition plan for 10,000 years, destroy the space passage, and never be enemies with Toulon. This was what Xiaoguan taught them with his life. No one dared to ignore it, because their ancestors said that they had failed in their mission. Everything they did was under the eyes of the mainstream of cultivation. There was no chance for them to escape. This ordinary Taoist represented the mainstream, the future, the cruel world of cultivation and the cruel reincarnation of the heavenly Tao. Lu Xiaoyi watched them leave. He kept his promise and didn't attack. The outer circle was vast and isolated from the world of cultivation. It wasn't a good thing to have no natural enemies at all. Keeping the Kongjia world was also a form of training for the people of Saturn. Humans, if there was no danger hanging behind them, it would be easy for them to become lazy and slack. They would lack creativity and motivation. From this point of view, the Kongjia realm still had its value. Even someone as powerful as the Fifth Ring kept finding different opponents for himself, no matter if it was the inner circle or the outer circle, let alone the small Toulon world. None of the cultivators of the Toulon world dared to move. They were the main characters, but when the legend arrived, they became background characters without exception. They didn't even have the right to say anything. The world of cultivation always belonged to the high-level cultivators. Lu Xiaoyi turned around and opened his arms. "Haha, slug. You're really tough. I thought you were already dead. I even drank a cup of wine for you during the Qingming festival and shed a few tears. I didn't expect that when the tiger isn't home, you're the monkey that's the king?" The directionally challenged person also opened his arms and laughed. "One ear. You didn't die even after doing all this. Why should I die before you? We're friends, so I have to keep my body intact and be ready to arrange your funeral at any time. Every Qingming festival, I'll send you a few more beauties." Chapter 2444. Toulon had turned from danger to safety. Cultivators were celebrating everywhere. They still had a lot to do. During the decades of being besieged, the Kongjia world had already left its own mark on the Toulon cultivation system, which needed to be corrected. There were still many details that didn't need to be mentioned in detail. Lu Xiaoyi and the slug drank wine and ate meat as usual. Since it was the slug's territory, of course, he would be the one to entertain them. The delicacies of Toulon were served continuously, but there were only the two of them. This was a private banquet, and no one else was qualified to be here. Only Yun Xianxian was busy. Since those old friends, the atmosphere had been rippling with emotion. This was also an inevitable experience for cultivators of their age. The two of them had met in Zhouxian in Jindan, when they were only a few hundred years old. Now, they were steadily advancing to the age of 4,000. Too many things had happened in between. Lu Xiaoyi looked at him. Snot, I never thought that with your temper, you actually have the potential to be a teacher of a realm? You're doing well in this place? I remember when you were a nascent soul, you cried and shouted, cursing and swearing that you would do the great path of destiny. Why, you still haven't forgotten your original intention. The slug sighed. Original intention? How can there be original intention for cultivators? It's all the thoughts of young people who are not mature enough. Later, when I cultivated, I realized that there was no hope for destiny. No one could merge with it. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. You're not stupid. You know that this is a dead end? Destiny has already descended to the mortal world, just like morality. It shouldn't be merged with anyone anymore. This is the trend. He was worried that this guy would be stubborn. Fortunately, he was in the realm of Yang's spirit. Although he had been separated from the mainstream for some time, it didn't affect his basic judgment. The great path wouldn't lie. The slug was much calmer than before. He was no longer the high-spirited young man. After thousands of years of tempering, even a stone could be trained to have no edges and corners. Although the external edges and corners were gone, the internal surging was still there. He was more purposeful, more planned, and more rational. I won't fight with you for the change of eras. I won't join in the fun. Strive to set your goal after the epic change, and see if you can find your own path. This was a very smart approach. He was only a young spirit now, and had not yet taken that step. In terms of time, even if he took that step before the end of the era, it would seem too urgent and would not be enough to complete the establishment of the Great Way. With his own experience, Lu Xiaoyi slowly understood how difficult it was to create a new Great Tao through the practical operations of several new Great Taos. It was not something that could be done just by slapping one's forehead and putting in more effort. It required time, opportunity, practice, innovation, and too many other things to prepare. Therefore, he was very much in favor of placing the opportunity in the new era. The original connate Great Tao is not easy to fuse with. One has to compete with golden immortals, or even transform into a golden immortal to compete. This path is destined to be bumpy. A new Great Tao is better. It can completely reflect a cultivator's personal cultivation philosophy. I don't have much to help you with, but there is one thing I can help you with. Pay more attention to practice, and don't be an armchair strategist. A grand Tao that hasn't been tested in practice is destined to fail. In the land of the Yellow Dragon, there are many grand Taos like this, but they are only the imaginations of cultivators. The important thing is to participate, and that's all. How about it? You haven't been back in Zhouxian for a long time, and you haven't seen the land of the Yellow Dragon. Do you want me to put you in a spirit beast bag and bring you back? Putting him in a spirit beast bag was just a joke. In fact, even someone as powerful as Lu Xiaoyi could not bring people to project the inner and outer stone sky. This was the rule of the heavenly Tao. When he pulled the inner and outer stone sky, he could only pull himself up, and he could not bring other human cultivators with him. Therefore, although it sounded simple to bring the slug back, it was actually a very complicated process. He was clear on this point, and so was the slug. It was not as simple as the people of Toulon thought. The slug shook his head. The timing is not right. The opportunity for me to establish my Tao is not in Zhouxian, nor is it in the Yellow Dragon. It is here, in Toulon. After more than 1,000 years, Some things have been deeply rooted and entangled. But don't worry, I will probably be able to take that step before the change of the era. Then, I will go to the Yellow Dragon to see you and experience the changes of the universe." Lu Xiaoyi smiled faintly and raised his cup to show his respect. Of course, he would not persuade him, because just like himself, when he was in lower 3 stages of foundation establishment, Jin Dan was in 5th ring, Yuanying was in Zhou, and Perfected Lord was in Heaven's Choice. When he took that step, it seemed like he was on the anchor chain. One's fate followed the trend, and no matter what others said, it was useless. Only one's own feelings were the most sensitive. Amen, that's good. But after taking that step, you must come back. What's fettered is the heart, not the wings. I still have important things to do in the Yellow Dragon and Heaven's Choice, and I am lacking trustworthy people. The slug shook his head and sighed. This friend of his could never be idle. If he was not working, he was on the road to becoming one. For thousands of years, he had never changed. With Qing Xian and the others helping you, do you still lack people? Lu Xiaoyi laughed mischievously. Of course I lack people. No matter how many there are, there won't be enough. The more the better. The slug was speechless. Was he trying to poke a hole in the sky? Yun Xianxian had been busy serving them food and drink. What surprised her was that the two of them were like two pigs who could eat, drink, and make. In fact, after a cultivator stepped on the path of Taoism, they rarely spent much effort on food. The higher they went, the more so it became. Around her, her fellow apprentices often drank a cup of weak tea and discussed Taoism, which was the demeanor of a cultivator. Unlike these two, who made a mess of empty wine bottles, meat bones, and smoke. This was not the style of cultivators at all. Instead, they were more like peddlers in the mortal world. Moreover, they did not have the high-end skills and artistic conception that she imagined. In addition to eating and drinking, they were trivial details of life that could not be more trivial. Bad friends, family affairs, and trivial matters. This scene was not the identity of two half-immortals and young spirits. It was like two neighbor aunties meeting on the street and talking about meaningless trivialities. Which family's son got a wife, which family's daughter got married, the price of vegetables rose again, and the male in charge of the house was no longer strong, and so on. However, these trivial matters could make top cultivators like them laugh heartily and never get tired of it. Slowly, from the initial confusion and curiosity, to later thoughtfulness, and finally a little understanding. In fact, they only talked about one topic. Time was ruthless and things remained the same, but people changed. They said and did this, but in fact, they were proving something. They were proving that they were still human. There were also people's 7 emotions and 6 desires, people's happiness and sadness, and people's various weaknesses. These things that were normal for ordinary people were incomparably precious to them. They were trying to prove that they were not stones. Chapter 2445. Lu Xiaoyi stayed in Tulan for a few days and took some time to meet the cultivators of Tulan. There was no need to be too aloof. He was not that kind of person. Tulan was not small. It was about the same size as Qingkong, but it was incomparable to Zhou. However, Slug felt very comfortable staying here. It was also their fate. From the beginning to the end, the Tulan people did not see the legendary cultivators show their skills. It was not that Lu Xiaoyi was hiding his skills, but he did not want to lead the cultivators here astray. Tulan's orthodoxy was very compatible with Xiaoyao travel. This was also one of the reasons why Slug could be like a fish in water here. His orthodoxy of sword vein had no market here. Whether it was the foundation or the environment, if he demonstrated it, the cultivators below would be delighted and delay his future. Everything had its own rules and should not be casually interfered. This was his experience. Of course, he never thought so when he was meddling. Finally, there was a time to say goodbye. The wine was drunk, the meat was eaten, and the cigarettes were passed. Knowing that his friend was still alive was the biggest reward of this trip to Thunder Prison. They did not have to stay together all the time. This was the helplessness of cultivation. Parting was always normal, and meeting was a surprise. However, even such surprises were getting rarer and rarer for them. "Are you going back to Yellow Dragon?" Slug got rid of his thoughts and had a clear direction for the future. His mental state was obviously much better. Lu Xiaoyi looked around subconsciously. "I'm not going back yet. Let Qing Xian be busy first. As soon as I go back, I'm ordered around like a dog. He doesn't even give me a holiday. I'll go to Zhou Xian first and report to your Qingwei immortal sect that I'm safe. By the way, I'll return the rubbish that you've comprehended over the years. Look, I'm a good friend, right?" Slug was disdainful. "Stop it. Don't use me as a shield. Didn't you get angry because of Yun Qianshan here? You want to go back and find your wife to vent your anger? We've known each other for so many years. How can I not know you?" Lu Xiaoyi laughed hollowly. This was indeed the reason, but it wasn't the whole reason. They were both half-immortals, so there was no reason for them to not be able to control themselves. However, there were some things that were hard to say. After all, his friend's realm was still a little low. Thus, he changed the subject. "There's something fishy about that dense lightning pool, but it's not suitable for you right now. That's an important place for spiritual treasures, and it wants to control your Tulan disciples. I think they're itching to try." Slug said, "Don't worry. I'm no longer the impulsive brat who drilled into the core of Zhou Xian. Of course, I understand the severity of the situation and will restrain them. My Tao doesn't lie in lightning either. You don't have to worry about me. I'll definitely meet up with you before the epoch changes. I'm sure we'll meet again." Lu Xiaoyi's figure rose up and gradually became fainter. His voice drifted over. "Next time we come to Toulon, let's sneak out and have some fun. Look at you Toulon believers. You don't have any sense at all. Why are you following me around every day? Don't you know how to gamble and fight in groups? How did you teach him? There's no breath of life at all. Can't you let people relax happily?" Seeing him disappear without a trace, Slug felt lost. However, the Toulon cultivators behind him were wild with joy. They definitely couldn't keep a legend, but as long as their martial uncle, who was a road addict, was there, Toulon would have no worries. Yun Qianshan asked what everyone was thinking. "Martial uncle, aren't you leaving?" Slug couldn't help but laugh. "Leaving? Not leaving now doesn't mean I won't leave in the future. It's just like how you left your hometown after cultivating." Every time his cultivation level increased, it meant a brand new world. Cultivators are the most wandering profession in the universe. "I'll leave, just like how I came here inexplicably." "You'll leave too. There's a more exciting world outside. But this doesn't mean I'll forget Toulon. I hope that everyone will be able to walk out." Lu Xiaoyi returned to Zhou Xian again. He had to make some preparations here. It had nothing to do with the Tianzhu continent. He could just leave those trivial matters to Qing Xian. There was also a committee, so he wouldn't make a difference. When the momentum was built up, there were many people in the cultivation world who wanted to take a share of it and were willing to contribute their intelligence and wisdom. When the group strength was built up, it didn't matter if there was one less decoration in the position who didn't care about politics. There were three things, public and private, that had to be done one by one. First, he had to go to the Qingwei immortal sect to meet Slug's seniors. He handed over some things and sent his greetings on behalf of Slug. It sounded boring and not a big deal, but considering that most of Slug's seniors were nearing the end of their lifespans, such a greeting was very precious. When he was young, he wouldn't have regarded such a greeting as a necessary task. However, he was different now. He knew very well what the old cultivators wanted to hear in their final moment. It was even more important than a longevity pill. How many years could a longevity pill add to one's lifespan? It was very limited. However, a piece of news from afar could make these old cultivators feel satisfied. This was more important. Zhou Xian had 9 sacred mountains. The Qingwei Immortal Sect was located in the Qingwei continent. Lu Xiaoyi had been in Zhou Xian for nearly 1,000 years, but he didn't have many opportunities to come to the Qingwei continent. Most of the time, he was traveling in Jindan. After he became a nascent soul, he began to fight in the void of the universe. With his temperament, he was unwilling to stay in the bounded domain and stifle himself. With his current status, no one would blame him whether he was in the open or in the dark. No one in Zhou Xian didn't know about Escort Lu's temper. Everyone treated him as one of their own and didn't see him as an outsider. Under such circumstances, Lu Xiaoyi didn't want to swagger around. He really didn't want to be a mascot and a legend to be admired by others. If he went through the normal channels, he could imagine that it would be another grand festival. The sects in Zhou Xian were especially good at this. They paid attention to red tape, paid attention to tradition, and didn't want to neglect it. Since he had the slug's token, he decided to enter unannounced. Although it had been a long time since he did something like this was not his first time. As one of the 4 bad friends in Zhou Xian, excluding Qing Xian, he was the closest to the slug. There were a few times when he sneaked in to do some shady business. In the past, the Qingwei Immortal Sect's cultivators didn't care about him. Now they couldn't do it. When he didn't want others to find out about his state, he could do it because of the effect of the purple gas. Of course, there were no half-immortals in Zhou Xian now. They had all gone to Huanglong. He flew in openly without any sneaky behavior. The only thing that the Qingwei Immortal Sect's cultivators didn't notice was that they couldn't see his face for some reason. They couldn't see clearly, but they wouldn't be suspicious. Naturally, it was as if this was their own sect. Following the familiar route, he soon arrived at the slug's former abode of immortals. Of course, it should be his abode now. As long as the soul lamp didn't extinguish, the sect wouldn't take back the abode of a perfected lord like the slug. They didn't lack such a place. It wouldn't cause any resentment among the returning disciples. Chapter 2446. Slug's cave abode was full of personal colors. This was to put it nicely. In fact, it was sloppy and no one took care of it. It wasn't that they didn't have the ability, but people like him and Lu Xiaoyi thought that it was best to be messy. They were comfortable and didn't need to maintain tidiness. Lazy people were generally like this. There were many valleys in Mount Qingwei, so most of the Qingwei cultivators' cave abodes were also in the valleys, forming a small world of their own. But Slug was different. He chose a mountain peak. In his words, it had a good view, but in fact, the real reason was that it was easy to throw rubbish and sundries down the mountain, so it was more convenient to throw them down the mountain. Thousands of years had passed, but this ancient sect hadn't changed at all. Everything was like yesterday, the era of young people flying freely. They came here to come and leave quietly, leaving Slug's things for the sect, and then making some noise in the cave abode could be considered to have achieved their goal. It could let the senior cultivators of Qingwei know that their disciple was fine and had a gratifying progress in his cultivation, and it could also avoid unnecessary social interaction. After all, he wasn't familiar with the senior cultivators of Qingwei. This kind of unfamiliar enthusiasm would make people feel awkward. Therefore, it was better to avoid it. After putting down the things, the old guys of Qingwei Immortal Sect would naturally know everything. It was a very simple matter. In his opinion, it was better to finish it early and not waste time here. It was better to go back and water his responsibility field. But when his figure passed through the simple array of the cave abode, he immediately felt that something was wrong. It wasn't danger. What danger was there? It was that there were people in the cave abode, a man and a woman. They were doing something that everyone liked to see and hear? What was this called? Lu Xiaoyi cursed his bad luck. But he couldn't help but be curious. He really couldn't figure out why someone would do such a private thing here. Was the Qingwei immortal sect's cave abode so tense? Of course, the cultivation sects were never overly strict with this kind of shady business. If both parties were willing, there was no need to make a fuss about it. They were all adults who couldn't be any older, so there wouldn't be any problems of forced or cheating. The key was that this place felt very strange. It was originally a very simple matter, but there was a small disturbance. The key was that this disturbance was very embarrassing then. Should he listen? Or watch? Or eavesdropping and peeking? Lu Xiaoyi felt that he was a responsible person for his friends. He was a person who had broken away from vulgar interests and was an open and above-board person. Therefore, he decided to eavesdrop. This place was definitely still the Slug's cave, because he could enter with the Slug's token. Of course, he could also enter without the token, but he didn't want to be sneaky. Most importantly, Qin Wei Immortal Trace, who had come in with the token, could be traced backwards. Thus, they knew that she was indeed a messenger sent by the Slug. He hovered above the cave, holding his breath silently, hoping to gain something from the conversation. Could it be one of the Slug's Dao companions? Actually, he wasn't confident either. As a friend, he hadn't come into contact with the Slug's women. He didn't know the realms of these women, their relationships, and other complicated things. It was his principle not to pry into private matters. As far as he knew, as a genius of the Qin Wei Immortal sect, the Snot Guy was very popular with the Kuan cultivators. He often boasted that there were people who threw themselves at him and even asked if he wanted to share some with him. He didn't expect to encounter such an embarrassing situation now. As a friend, he had to figure it out, right? He couldn't let his friend wear a hat like this, right? He didn't know if it was possible to dissolve the relationship between two people after living apart for a long time in this cultivation world. When he focused all his attention on the cave's environment, he finally figured out the approximate identity of the couple in the cave. To be precise, they weren't two humans. One of them was a merman. A merman, also known as a dugong. It was a relatively rare humanoid race among the demon beasts. After several generations of interbreeding with humans, it settled in countless small continents in Zhou and cultivated. Although it didn't belong to the category of humans, it had existed in Zhou for a long time and was also recognized by the cultivation world in Zhou. This breed was docile, didn't cause trouble, and got along well with humans. It was a model of the human cultivation world's self-proclaimed education regardless of race. Lu Xiaoyi once encountered the siren race in the negative space when he was in Yuanying. This was a magical race, and he had interacted with this race before. There were sea demons in the Tsang Sea and sirens in the void. They were all mythical races among humans. They had one common characteristic, which was that they were beautiful and good at singing. The siren fish existed in the void. The largest one was 5 to 6 feet long and looked like a human. Its eyebrows, mouth, nose, claws, and head were all beautiful women. Its skin and flesh were white like jade, without scales, with fine hair. It was 5-colored and soft, 1 to 2 inches long. Its hair was like a ponytail, 5 to 6 feet long, and its shape was no different from a woman's. The sirens should be distant relatives of the sirens. Their bloodline had been assimilated by humans for countless generations. The sirens living in Zhou didn't have much of their ancient sirens' bloodline. They had also lost many strange abilities, leaving only relatively basic characteristics, such as beauty, interest, and a much longer lifespan than humans. Most of them had the potential to cultivate. The two people below were doing strange things. One was a human and the other was a boa. However, he did not know how they were related to the slug. He was certain that they were related. Most likely, she was one of the many concubines that the slug once had. Now, nearly 2,000 years had passed. The human wife hadn't survived, but the siren's wife was still alive and kicking. She even had the interest in daily exercise. His friend might have been cuckolded, but he wasn't angry. He was only gloating. This guy deserved it. He had left for 2,000 years. It was inhumane to ask the siren's wife, who had strong needs in this aspect, to be a widow for such a long time. In the cultivation world, this kind of life and death parting was too common. The universe was so big that it was common to leave for a lifetime. Should the other half be a chaste woman? Moreover, it wasn't a legal marriage. It was just a random whim. He knew his friend's character very well. He could just turn a blind eye to this kind of thing. After all, the sirens weren't real humans. They still had a part of their instincts. Suppressing it for 2,000 years wouldn't benefit their endocrine system. This wasn't important. The important thing was, in this siren's breathing, he vaguely smelled a scent that didn't belong to the lower realm. She was doing something and he was sniffing at the side? This was really embarrassing, but since things had come to this, he couldn't pretend that he didn't know, could he? Several people had already told him about the methods used by the immortal court in the upper realm to plant seeds in the lower realm, including those who had real experience in the immortal court, such as Wenji and Daoist Cn. He thought he already knew a lot, but he didn't expect there to be such a primitive and happiest method. Chapter 2447. The problem was that stupid person. What was his motive? Was it before or after the slug left? Was this kind of daily life just for instinctive pleasure, or did he have other motives? Would it affect the Qing Wei immortal sect? Or was he just using this place as a springboard to hatch? After he merged with a trace of purple qi from the earth and strengthened it in the purple thunder purgatory, he had a more intuitive sense of the secret actions of the immortal court people. But he didn't know if he should expose all of this. He was no longer young and was at the moment when the era was changing. The people of the immortal court used all kinds of strange methods to descend to the lower realm, making it impossible to guard against. All of this was actually normal. Just as Daoists said, you half-immortals have the right to climb up, but why can't the immortals have the right to rise again? Should they die without a burial place? Moreover, he couldn't care about this kind of thing and shouldn't interfere in everything, no matter how big or small. Lu Xiaoyi was very clear that even if the slug was here, it was hard to say if he should involve his friends in the affairs of the immortal court people. Similarly, it was hard to say if it was appropriate to expose this matter to the higher-ups of the Qing Wei immortal sect. The reason was very simple. Whether it was the slug or the Qing Wei immortal sect, they didn't have the ability to deal with this kind of matter. Kill and settle it? How could it be so simple? What kind of matter was this? No matter how much Lu Xiaoyi listened, he couldn't hear anything other than anger. He felt something and quietly left the cave abode, leaving the simple array of the cave abode, and waited outside the mountain peak. Not long after, a Qing Wei Yuanying flew over. When she saw Lu Xiaoyi, she bowed and said in an extremely respectful tone, "Are you Martial Uncle Xuan Kong?" Disciple Tingyu greets Martial Uncle. He didn't know this historical figure because he wasn't even 1,000 years old. He had only heard of the sect figures from 2,000 years ago but had never seen them. Qing Wei was too old, so even if he wanted to flatter, he wouldn't put his effort into this kind of person who had disappeared for 1,000 years. Xuan Kong wasn't the only person like this in Qing Wei. To most of them, they would never come back. However, since he was in charge of Mount Qingwei's formation pivot, he could ignore the Immortals' Cave of Jindan, but he had to pay attention to the Immortals' Cave of a great cultivator. This was especially true for true monarchs. This was the reason why he had appeared here. In nearly 2,000 years, Martial Uncle Xuan Kong's cave abode was opened with his own communication talisman for the first time. This basically represented his return. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. He didn't want to alarm these old cultivators, but now he was forced to come out into the open. Tingyu. All right, inform the sect leader and ask him to come see me. Tingyu was perturbed. How could he not know what was going on? Everyone in the Qing Wei Immortal sect knew about what had happened in the cave abode of martial Uncle Shuang Kong, but everyone pretended not to know about it. In this regard, there were two big sects in Zhou who were more open-minded and never cared about it. One was for sloppy travel, and the other was for clearing snot. The two sects were Xiaoyao Travel and Qing Wei Immortal sect. It wasn't that they were really unbearable, but they had always been laissez-faire when it came to dual cultivation between men and women. Therefore, in the eyes of other more serious sects, they were given these two nicknames, which were just a joke. Martial Uncle Shuang Kong had left the mountain for a long time, so long that his human Taoist companions had all disappeared. In fact, even if these human Taoist companions were still here, they would have already found their next home. For the sake of precious cultivation resources, who would still hang on this half-dead tree without an owner? In the mortal world, they might not even be able to stay single for decades. How could you ask a cultivator with a long lifespan? It was also a very immoral waste of resources, wasn't it? This was just the theoretical basis. More importantly, martial Uncle Shuang Kong's human Taoist companion had begun to advance by leaps and bounds since the man disappeared. It only took her more than 1,000 years to go from Yuanying to true monarch, and now she had already become a young spirit. In Qing Wei Immortal sect, of course, it was impossible for her to participate in the core affairs of the sect as a human, but her yang spirit realm made people respect her and dare not underestimate her. Realm strength was everything in the cultivation world. Therefore, it was understandable that she had been more unrestrained in her actions in the past 1,000 years. In Zhou, this terrifying beauty could be said to be famous for a period of time. She was famous in a certain circle. There were often foreign cultivators who came here as guests. This kind of atmosphere couldn't be tolerated in conservative sects, but in Qing Wei Immortal sect, the environment was open, and her realm was high. Why couldn't others talk about the mystery and the Tao? Dual cultivation was also Tao. In this sense, there was no big problem. Originally, all of this didn't need to be said, but once the master came back, there would be big trouble. It couldn't be discussed in detail. Anyway, he didn't dare to talk about it. Looking for the sect master? That couldn't be better. If he really asked him some questions, would he answer or not? Martial Uncle, please wait a moment. I'll pass on the message. He didn't dare to delay. In a big house, one's judgment was the most important. One shouldn't get involved in matters that didn't concern oneself. Both of them were senior martial uncles of perfected sovereigns. It didn't matter if it was too deep or too shallow. He thought very well and did it very quickly, but this pair of martial uncles didn't let him go. Has this situation been going on for a long time? Tingyu broke out in a cold sweat. He didn't know why, but in front of this martial uncle who was rumored to be quite powerful, he seemed to be a skinned rabbit. There seemed to be no secrets in his body. His martial uncle's eyes were not sharp, and there was no pressure from his chi, but he intuitively felt that he couldn't hide anything from him. It's been nearly 1,000 years. It's been like this since martial Uncle Mingzhu became a supreme and applied to the sect to move here. I don't know what happened before. Lu Xiaoyi continued to ask, how many guests come here? How many are there in the mainland? Tingyu cried, martial uncle's guests are supreme martial uncle's guests. We don't dare to ask too much, and we can't record them one by one. Please forgive us. But the overall impression is 8 outside and 2 inside. He bit his teeth and said the exact number in the end. In fact, the actual situation was more than 7 outside and 3 inside. According to his seniors, in the beginning, there were more guests from outside. Later on, they became familiar with the idea of keeping the goodies within the family. Some of the unrestrained people in the sect didn't have so many scruples. Of course, they were in the minority. In such a large sect, there were some who acted absurdly, but there were even more who were strict with themselves and did not want to get involved in this mess. Even if the rumors outside were amazing, saying how amazing this pair of people's dual cultivation skills were. Who asked this martial uncle to go out and not return for nearly 2,000 years? If he really didn't care, he shouldn't have made such a big fuss. It was not easy for him to come back, but he didn't take the main road and didn't go to the main hall to return the receipt. Instead, he went back to his own house to play catch. Fortunately, he sent an urgent message. Before Martial Uncle could ask a few questions, 2 streams of light flashed from afar. His savior had come. Chapter 2448. The person who came was Taoist Huasheng, the leader of the current Qingwei immortal sect. Behind him was his junior brother Zhongjiang, both of whom were Yang spirit supremes. Speaking of which, their attitude towards this true monarch Qi was truly difficult to deal with. On the one hand, Qingwei immortal sect was a big sect in Zhouxian, not a big brothel in Zhouxian. With such a famous Koan cultivator, even Qi Zhu would lose face. Generally, dual cultivation partners were fixed and would not be changed so frequently. On the other hand, no matter how much Qi Zhu's behavior was out of line, a Yang spirit supremacy was very important to any sect and could not be given up. They could only classify her as a dual cultivation disciple. Fortunately, there were many kinds of Taoist techniques in Qingwei immortal sect, so it was not out of thin air. The only trouble was martial nephew Xuankong. However, he had been in the universe for nearly 2,000 years. Although his lantern was still there, it was very common for him to be trapped in some place and not be able to come back. Therefore, they could only take one step at a time. Who would have thought that this person would really come back? Huasheng was the sect leader and Zhongjiang was Xuankong's senior. If they came, they could at least suppress the matter to a certain extent, right? Before the two of them approached, Xuankong, whose back was facing, whispered to Tingyu, "There's nothing for you to do, you can leave." Tingyu was like an imperial edict. After getting Taoist Huasheng's approval, she flew away. She was very glad that she was not involved in such a complicated scandal. The remaining 2 Yang spirit supremes looked dignified. Zhongjiang was a little uncertain facing the Taoist with his back to them. "Who are you? How dare you come to my Qingwei immortal sect and pretend to be a fellow disciple?" Lu Xiaoyi turned around and smiled faintly. "I've been to this broken place many times. Tell me, what's going on down there?" Huasheng and Zhongjiang looked and complained in their hearts. The thing they did not want to see the most had happened. "So it's Minister C who came in person. You should at least say hello so that we can make some preparations. It's the grand scene of Qingwei." Lu Xiaoyi waved his hand. "What I'm afraid of is your long-winded talk. I saw the slug a few days ago somewhere in the outer circle of the universe. It can be considered to be a proper place to cultivate. Right now, my sun spirit is planning to go up a bit more. The reason he came back this time was to bring back some insights about cultivation for you all. He was not free for the time being and still needed to cultivate outside for a few days. I'm just here to deliver a message and something. I wanted to leave after putting it down, but I didn't expect to see such a rare thing here. I'm not Xuankong, so I can't empathize with him. But as Xuankong's friend, I hope there's a reasonable explanation. Everyone in Zhouxian knows my temper. I don't like to hear lies. You dare to lie to me? I don't care if you're from the slug sect." The 2 sun gods were extremely embarrassed. In Zhouxian, no one dared to speak to Qingwei like that, not even a half-immortal, except for one person. In front of this person, Zhouxian had no resistance, because they couldn't even find a sect that was willing to stand with them. However, the so-called pain and happiness, in fact, Escort Lu was also one of them, and he was also helping Qingwei's disciples. So if there was a mistake, just admit it, and if there was something to say, it was no big deal. Huasheng sighed. "Escort Lu, this is indeed a bit shameful. It's not ethical, we all know that. But when the child grows up, it's not up to him. Once the realm is up, we can't be so strict, especially in personal affairs. As long as we don't deceive our masters and destroy our ancestors, there aren't so many rules. This is also the truth of all the big sections. Please forgive us. Zhongjiang also said, Escort Lu, I also took Xuan Kong as my disciple for a period of time. I'm half a teacher to him. Originally, this kind of thing can't be allowed to happen, but there are some details that Escort Lu might not know. This pearl wasn't chosen through normal means. It was simply used to pay off a debt. I remember at that time I scolded that guy for this. He had too many women in his room. Sooner or later, it would be troublesome, but he just didn't listen. After Xuan Kong left, there was no news. The people in the room either left or scattered. I never cared about it. I also knew that the guy didn't care about it in his heart. Only this pearl had a long lifespan, and she had some skills. That's why the sect was in a dilemma later. Hua Xing was indeed the leader of a big sect. He made a quick decision. In his opinion, one side was his own sect's direct human disciple, who was also a sun spirit, and also had Lu Xiaoyi as a big backer. It went without saying which side he should sit on. He said in a low voice, Escort Lu. The mistake has been made. It's useless to regret it. It's human nature to be lascivious. I think, since it's like this, in order to settle the resentment of Xuan Kong in the future, and also to clean up the sect's atmosphere, it's better to go all the way. Let's find an opportunity. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. This was the style of the Taoist big sections. He couldn't say anything. If they destroyed the evidence early, the slug wouldn't care too much when he came back. Of course, they had to make him feel comfortable. This was the real intention of these two old guys. After a little consideration, they immediately abandoned what should be abandoned. They were very ruthless. Lu Xiaoyi thought about it and still felt that this kind of thing didn't make sense for him to bear alone. He also didn't have so much time to deal with Qingwei's family affairs. These old guys were too indulgent in this aspect. They were also a little blind. Of course, they had to bear the responsibility. He waved his hand. Your sect's atmosphere has nothing to do with me. How can there be right or wrong in the matter below the navel? I didn't ask you to come here for this trivial matter. After thousands of years of cultivation, there's no reason for you to end up catching adulterers. There's something wrong with this pearl. I observed her breath. It's possible that she came down from above. When the two old Taoists heard this, they were shocked. The sun spirits of thousands of years were so shocked that they almost broke out in cold sweat. They weren't ignorant and ill-informed people. The epoch was about to change, and news was flying all over the place. Some of the rumors were known to all. For example, the matter of immortals planting seeds in the mortal world was the most important one. It made these old cultivators feel fear and hope. Of course, everyone hoped that they were planted by the great Tao silently. However, there were only about 30 golden immortals in the immortal court. Innate great Taos were limited. How could it be the Qingwei immortal sect's turn? However, if it was planted by a human immortal or a true immortal, it was hard to say what the cause and effect was. Immortals weren't all upright and above-board. When their lifespans were coming to an end, many of them were shameless and took risks out of desperation. Immortals could put all their eggs in one basket. If they really found a sect like theirs, could it be that they would also follow them into that dead end? Who was Escort Lu? It was true that he liked to joke, but it was impossible for him to make fun of them in this kind of matter. Since he spoke, there must be a reason. Thinking about it carefully, this kind of private matter involving immortals could only be found out by people like Escort Lu who had killed immortals. It was a disaster. Chapter 2449. The two old Taoists trembled in fear. This time, they weren't faking it, they were really afraid. Because of her special background and her actions all these years, their instincts told them that she wasn't a good person. Leaving such a troublemaker in the sect, That would be, please, for the sake of the immortal of Zhou's lineage, teach me. Lu Xiaoyi thought for a while. It wouldn't be good to just wash his hands of this matter. After all, it was his friend's sect, and they had some karma. Since she might come from above, then a simple and violent extermination won't work. Can we kill all of them? Does she still have friends with clones? Her own intentions? If she's just borrowing Qingwei's treasured land to pass through, there's no need to bear the karma. The two old Taoists nodded in agreement. This was exactly what they were worried about. They couldn't just kill her. Lu Xiaoyi pointed to the cave abode below. Don't have the heart to harm others, but don't let your guard down. The first thing you have to understand is, what's the purpose of her actions? Only then can you make a judgment. Go and investigate. Every cultivator who has interacted with her before. You can't be blatant, you have to beat around the bush. The timeline, the character's characteristics, any recent abnormalities, etc. You're all experienced cultivators, so you're very clear about the benefits of borrowing and making connections. You don't need me to teach you one by one. If it's just personal interest, then she's forbidden from doing this. She won't not understand what you mean, so she'll naturally leave. If there's something more to this, don't act rashly. Just find someone to pass the news to me. I'll be in Zhouxian and Tianzi for a while, so it'll be easy to find me. The two old Taoists nodded cautiously. This was a serious matter, so they couldn't afford to be careless. Fortunately, the guard was still willing to help them. Otherwise, if he really found out something, they might not dare to do it. They could be decisive when dealing with a simple human, but if she was planted by an immortal, that was another matter. Qingwei might not be able to carry such a large family business and power, because they didn't have someone like Guard Lu. Lu Xiaoyi continued, you have to be careful, discreet, natural, and especially secretive. This is not a small matter. Don't let those ignorant supremes Yuanying do it. Just let you core yang spirits do it. The two old Taoists' faces were gloomy. This sudden change made them very uneasy. Good. Don't worry. I promise I won't alarm her. Qingwei had lived for hundreds of thousands of years, so she could still do this in Zhouxian. However, he couldn't hold a welcoming dinner for Escort C. Yasi Jing is very knowledgeable. Tell me, how many similar incidents are there in the universe cultivation realm? How did the other families deal with it? Lu Xiaoyi sneered. Whether or not there are many depends on how many immortals there are in the sky. How many of them do you think are willing to be buried in the history of cultivation? If he's a human, I suggest we kill him. But if it's another race, we need to take a closer look, understand? The two old Taoists were stunned for a moment before they nodded. The truth of cultivation is everywhere. Hua Xing sighed, from what I see, this Lu Zhu rarely fights with others. She's a very amiable and docile person. So the sect has always been very tolerant of her. She usually plants flowers and plants to cultivate her character. She even raises a lot of rabbits in her garden. She even calls herself Rabbit Fairy. She doesn't look like a vicious person. Lu Xiaoyi sneered. He stood up and was about to leave when he faintly left behind a sentence. If one day you see someone leading a rabbit to hunt, it can only mean that the rabbit's bite is more vicious than a dog's bite. Yellow Court Mountain, dawn broke in the east. Lu Xiaoyi stretched lazily on the couch and said to the woman who was grooming herself, Don't worry, wife, I heard that you're famous in the Yellow Court for being an expert in raising flowers. Help me find some books about medicinal pills and spirit plants in your sect. I'm old and plan to turn over a new leaf and enjoy my old age by fiddling with some flowers and plants. The woman carefully dressed up. Even though it had been thousands of years, she had never slacked off because of the passage of time. She could choose not to cultivate, but she couldn't not fix her makeup. Hearing this, she curled her lips. After harming living beings, you want to harm plants? Little E, can't you just stop? Just obediently erect a monument in Yellow Dragon and split up Heaven's choice. There are so many important things to do, but you insist on doing those useless things. Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. I also don't want to. Establishing Tao is too brain-burning, splitting up Heaven's Choice is too tiring. I just want to lie on the couch every day, think about life at night, sleep until I wake up naturally, have 3 or 2 friends, drink and laugh at life. I want to, but others don't let me. After helping the spiritual treasure, I'll fish people out. After I'm done with living beings, I'll be busy with nature. It doesn't have to be too profound. It just has to cover a wide range. It can make a newbie become a gardener in a very short period of time. After the woman finished packing, she shook her head and sighed. She knew that the man was preparing for a certain scene, but she couldn't be bothered to ask. With her little ability, it was useless to ask. All right, I'll go to the main hall today to settle some matters, and find the things you want while I'm at it. I won't be back in the afternoon. Lu Xiaoyi shouted from behind her. If you're not coming back, you have to find someone to send the food over. Give me a few more 8 treasure camphor tea ducks in your yellow quart for lunch. The woman left by herself. Lu Xiaoyi was a little distressed. Before the matter was settled, there was another new worry. The matter started from the purple lightning purgatory. During the last stage of helping Lord Ling Long deal with the lightning of resentment, he accidentally saw Lord Ling Long's last memory, which was also the last moment of Lord Ling Long's fall. This made him understand a lot of things, and also partially explained a lot of doubts that had always existed in his heart. As the epoch changed, the disagreements in the immortal court were much greater than he had imagined. Of course, the disagreements between the immortals would not be brought to the table to fight to the death. Generally, they would achieve their goals through their agents in the mortal world. He, Lu Xiaoyi, was also one of the representatives, and a very important one at that. All these years, his actions in the universe war, his way of doing things in the eye of heaven, his moment of glory in the inner and outer scenic heavens, his departure from the orthodoxy when he established his Tao, and many other actions that seemed to be courting death at that time, were all supported and paid for by someone behind the scenes. There was an existence that wanted to kill him, but at the same time, there was also a power that supported him. Otherwise, he wouldn't even be able to find his grave after being so arrogant and despotic all the way. What he saw in Lord Ling Long's last memory was the truth about all of this, but he didn't know if it was all of it. It shouldn't be, because it didn't involve the Golden Immortals, but as a contest of power between 2 sides, how could it not involve the Golden Immortals, the highest decision-making level of the Immortal Court? In Lord Ling Long's memory, he saw the attitude of the true immortals in this Tao battle. One of the very important people was the anesthetist. Chapter 2450. Anesthetist. This was not the first time Lu Xiaoyi had heard of this person from the immortal court. In Li Wuya's past, he had also interacted with this anesthetist. This was a person who had always stood on their side and supported the Reformation. His influence extended to the human immortals and true immortals. In Lord Linglong's memory, the last moment was also the most crucial one. Thus, he gave this message. This anesthetist would also face the predicament of being demoted. It was hard to say whether Lord Linglong knew that the person who had been guarding him was Lu Xiaoyi. From Wen Ji's reminder to Lord Linglong's last hint, was this a premeditated lower realm spy? Hinting that Lu Xiaoyi should do something? This was not important. To Lu Xiaoyi, he had received help from others before. Of course, he had to return the favor. He was not a person who liked to owe others favors. Moreover, some karma could no longer be calculated clearly under the changes of time. While he still had some ability, he should help as much as he could. After thousands of years of killing, before the new era, he had started to do good deeds? Standing up, he saw more than 10 pots of strange stone orchids outside the window of the woman's cave. They were somewhat out of place with the original flower arrangement of the woman's cave. This was not the woman's work. Lu Xiaoyi asked the woman to get them after he came to the yellow court. He only asked for one pot, but she gave him a pile. Strange stone orchids were actually a kind of grass that grew on stones. They were resistant to cold, heat, water, and drought. They did not have flowers in their lifetime, so of course they did not have fragrance. However, in the natural world of this universe, it was a very common grass, especially in the cultivation world. Anesthetist's root was this strange stone orchid. If one day all the strange stone orchids in the universe suddenly withered, it meant that anesthetist had been demoted in the immortal court. It was also the time for him to move. He had protected his friends and spiritual treasures. Now it was time to protect the plants. Of course, this time, no one asked him to do so. However, he knew that he had to do it. Human immortals had their own way of descending to the next epoch, such as the future of the great Tao and so on. Innate spiritual treasures also had their own way, such as the return of the thunder prison to chaos. Then, what was the way of the plant immortal? This was a field that he had never come into contact with before. Therefore, he needed to cram in his knowledge of nature as soon as possible so that he would not be flustered when doing things in the future and not know where to start. As Ji Yuan's footsteps approached, almost everything that happened around him that could attract his attention was related to the immortal court. This was inevitable. Most likely, he was not the only one. The battle for the great Tao was speeding up, and it was gradually becoming white-hot. For many immortals, since the truth had already begun to spread in the lower realms, there was no need to be overly cautious. What will come, will come. He planned to stay in the Yellow Court for a while and wait for the news of the terrifying person from the Qingwei immortal sect. His intuition told him that the origin of this thing was not ordinary. He had come into contact with many immortals, and almost all of them could abide by the rules of the immortal court. However, he did not believe that all immortals would abide by the rules. There would always be those who would take risks out of desperation, and there would definitely be those who would stake everything on one throw. Once this happened, it would cause an irreparable tragedy to the lower realms. If everything was normal and the Qi Shilan was still growing, he would go to Heaven's Choice to meet everyone. However, the possibility of him entering and leaving freely would be very low. Everyone was busy, so he could not be the only one who was idle. He had to at least pretend to be busy, right? Did Oathkeeper Lu start to play with flowers and plants? This was simply a miracle in the eyes of the higher-ups of the Yellow Court. There were even young gods who asked Xia Bingji in private whether Oathkeeper Lu's head had become rusty from establishing Tao. This made Xia Bingji unable to explain. She found that no matter what this guy did, he could always cause a different demonstration effect from others. But overall, Lu Xiaoyi did not cause any big trouble when he returned to the Yellow Court this time. He just stayed in the cave all day to think about things. He wanted to establish Tao, wanted to split up, and had all kinds of thoughts. In the beginning, she was not used to it. Her originally peaceful and monotonous life was messed up, but she slowly accepted it. She was also very clear that the peace was only temporary. Once something started, it would be a storm, and a spectacular one. Until Ji Yuan changed. She took a break from work and farmed at home. This was Lu Xiaoyi's fundamental intention. He wanted to make himself more relaxed. He had accumulated a lot. For nearly 4,000 years, he had been working hard to enrich himself, just for the final outbreak. After a year, he felt that he had rested enough. But whether it was the news of the Qingwei immortal sect or the strange stone orchids, there was no change. There was no news from the Qingwei immortal sect. It could only be said that the Qingwei immortal sect cultivators had not found any conclusive evidence. Perhaps it was just an ordinary immortal planting the orchids? He hadn't done it in the sky for hundreds of years, but when he came down, he did it to his heart's content. More than a dozen strange stone orchids were still alive and well, which meant that the anesthetist was also living well up there. he found a spiritual plant space to place the strange stone orchids. This morning, after eating an exquisite breakfast, Lu Xiaoyi looked at his woman gently. I'm going to save the world. I may not be back for a while. The woman snorted. Save yourself first, and save the world. Hurry up and leave, the food at home is almost eaten up by you. Lu Xiaoyi laughed heartily. After so many years together, he had finally changed the way the woman spoke to him. This was very good, there was no sadness. He swayed his body, no regrets in his heart, for the better of the new era. Heaven's Choice Continent, Zhongshan Peak. This was the highest peak in Heaven's Choice Continent. It was also the location of the Separation Committee. There had to be a place like this where everyone could gather, come up with ideas, and gather information. There would be people at any time, and there were quite a few of them. Up until now, they were basically all half-immortal cultivators. When the perfected monarch Yuanying joined in, that would be the separation implementation stage. But now, there was really no need to find too many people in the planning stage. Half-immortal was enough. In terms of time, every half-immortal's time was actually very precious. Everyone commuted between Yellow Dragon and Heaven's Choice, shuttling back and forth. But other than an extremely small number of people who were truly infatuated with the newly established Xiantian Dao, most of the half-immortals had actually wisely set their goal within the 10,000 years after the new era. That was the time with the highest probability of ascending to immortal. It was not only Lu Xiaoyi who understood this, in fact, almost every half-immortal understood the truth of the change of eras. Everyone had their own unique source of information, and they all had their own relatives and friends. Thus, many secrets were actually not secret. The Xiantian Dao was guarded by a golden immortal. How could it be overthrown so easily? Without a world-shaking Xiantian Dao, one could forget about getting a share of the biggest cake. But it was still necessary to establish a Dao in Yellow Dragon, because this was a once-in-a-lifetime stage to display oneself in the universe's cultivation world. Not for the Xiantian Dao, but for the Houtian Dao after the new era. Chapter 2451. Because most of the half-immortals didn't really want to create their own innate Dao at the moment of the change of era, they had more time to accumulate merits for their own postnatal Dao. Splitting up the Heaven's Choice Continent was the best method they could find now. Looking at the composition of the half-immortals, including the inner and outer scenic sky, about 30% of the half-immortals were willing to participate in the splitting up of Heaven's Choice Continent. Don't think that this number was small. In the group of high-level cultivators, to have 30% participate in the splitting up of Heaven's Choice Continent was already a miracle in the history of cultivation. Another 20% belonged to the members of the Heaven Guard Society. They firmly opposed the splitting up of Heaven's Choice Continent, believing that it would bring more harm to Heaven's Choice Continent. It was purely adding feet to a snake to draw legs for a certain person's fancy. Cultivation was cultivation, nature was nature. This was the core philosophy of the Heaven Guard Society. Of course, the other 50% had their own thoughts. Some focused on themselves and didn't want to be confused by the outside world. Some wanted their own opportunities and didn't want to be in the same group. Some didn't want to submit to others and set up their own mountain. There were also those who were prepared to bet on both sides. This was the real situation of the cultivation world. What surprised Lu Xiaoyi was that Qing Xian, Shi Shi, and Yan Chen weren't there. They didn't have any joint action, but each of them had their own private matters. This was a common phenomenon among the dozens of half-immortals in the committee. Most of the committee members weren't present, as they were busy with their own cultivation. This was also a kind of rotation. As long as there were a dozen or so committee members at the Zhang Mountain Peak, they would be able to mobilize the tens of thousands of half-immortals who came to contribute in an orderly manner. There was no need for everyone to gather together, as the more people there were, the more trouble there would be. He didn't care. His friends had to understand that this matter wasn't something they could do alone. Letting go appropriately was the smart thing to do. Things had already reached this stage. Splitting up Heaven's Choice continent was no longer Lu Xiaoyi's matter alone, nor was it the matter of the Five Rings group. It was the clash of two big ideas. Was it man's will to conquer nature? Or let nature take its course? This actually decided the direction of the new era's Tao. Among the innate Taos, was it still nature's Tao? Or was it cultivation's Tao? The battle of Tao had already begun. If it was right, it would be of great help to one's Tao. If it wasn't, it would be outdated. If you just stood at the side and watch, then the fun would always belong to others. When the splitting of the Heaven's Choice continent truly began, there would be even more cultivators throwing in their bets. This was inevitable. But Bamboo Hat, he had to play a bigger role than ordinary half-immortals in order to live up to his future ambitions. We've divided the entire Heaven's Choice continent into over 3,000 pieces. Half-immortals as immortals are free to go. But I don't know if we can finish it all to Heaven's Tao. Will be able to complete Heaven's Tao before the heaven space collapse. Lu Xiaoyi nodded slightly. This was the wisdom of a group. The biggest advantage of doing this was that everyone involved would have a specific contribution and a real sense of participation. It would make them feel that they were truly involved, not just symbolically. Placing the points wasn't a simple matter. The Heaven's Choice continent was divided into more than 3,000 pieces. Although each piece didn't seem big, if one considered that the points weren't only placed on the surface, but more importantly, in the core of the Earth's crust, then the difficulty of placing the points and the number of points would be astronomical. Just the cost of measuring the equipment and spiritual vigor at the gathering point was difficult for an individual or a certain faction to raise by themselves. But, if they were to divide the work, the pressure of the equipment and spiritual vigor would be transferred to every half-immortal who accepted the mission. For example, if a few half-immortal friends booked an area, they would have to calculate how many measuring points would be the most appropriate in that area. Then, he would use his own money to prepare the materials and spiritual devices. Then, he would make surveying and mapping devices according to the standard. Finally, he would sneak into the ground and place them one by one. In this process there would be hard work and effort. But, if they were to succeed in the end, they would have a lot of merit points and would be able to add a thick stroke to their great Tao. This was the founder of the new era. Those who dared to take risks and change their hearts. No one would give up such a rare opportunity. It wasn't as simple as just placing the points, it also needed to be maintained for a period of time. The Earth's crust was also being compressed and deformed. Some failures were unavoidable. Since you booked this area, you would have to be responsible for it until the end. This was the responsibility of every participant. Do your best and leave the rest to fate. I heard that everyone in the committee had to complete this area? Later on, tell me my portion of the location. I want to find an opportunity to experience it. Lu Xiaoyi thought of another point. Have you considered the possibility of sabotage? I know that the members of the Heaven Protector Society are very dissatisfied with us, but they wouldn't go to the extent of doing something that angers both man and God just because of a difference in ideology. After all, once they do something like this, the karma would be huge and their Tao would be broken. But we also have to consider the possibility that there might be a few crazy people. Do they have nothing to lose? The Bamboo Hat Man frowned. This was also a problem that he had been worried about. There were too many people involved, and they couldn't distinguish between the good and the bad. It was hard to say if there were no such people. If they came out to make trouble at the critical moment, it would cause irreparable damage to them. The space would shatter in an instant, leaving only a short time for the mapping points to record the information of the space crack. Once the mapping points in a certain area were destroyed, they would lose control of the structure of the Earth's core. In the future, They wouldn't be able to have a target when they split the area. If they split the area in the wrong location, there would only be one result, which was a large-scale earthquake. If they didn't handle it well and the earthquake spread, it would be a disaster. We are also trying to ease the differences between us and the Heaven Protector Society. We don't take the initiative to provoke them. We only argue about ideology. But you know, no matter what organization it is, as long as there are too many people, there will inevitably be some reckless people who don't care about the overall situation. Lu Xiaoyi thought for a moment. It's better to let them go. This kind of disagreement can't be solved by avoiding it. It's better to find a reason for everyone to vent their anger. If you want a reason, then do it. If you want to fight, then fight. More importantly, although the ideals of the Heaven Splitter Society and the Heaven Protector Society are diametrically opposite, their goals are the same. They both want to prevent the Heaven's Choice from suffering a large loss of people. We have to put in more effort in this aspect. The bamboo hat man nodded. I think so too. We have to find a chance to fight. Let's relax the tense atmosphere before the change of the era. According to my observation, ever since Huang Long established his Tao, there have been fewer opportunities to fight to the death. There are many people who feel uncomfortable all over because they are holding it in. For cultivators of our generation, it's useless to talk about reason. How can there be reason in cultivation? Everyone has their own reason. The bigger the fist, the more important it was. Why don't we just pick a time to solve it together? Chapter 2452. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. If you have any ideas, you can bring them up at the committee. There's no need to wait for me. The bamboo hat shook. There's no need to wait for you to make a decision. But when it's time to do it, you can't be absent. Otherwise, the Tao Protector Association is filled with hidden dragons and crouching tigers. We don't have absolute confidence in winning. Especially among them, there are far more people with immortal seeds than on our side. This is also a fact. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Let's not do it first. Let's spread the news first and let everyone know that there's a way to solve the problem. Naturally, there will be fewer setbacks. It's useless to do it early. After a few hundred years, there will be people who will forget the pain. Do you want to do it again? It's best to set the time before the epoch changes, before the space collapses. You have to grasp the timing well. The two had a deep discussion about the separation of Heaven's Choice. Then, the marching monk joined in. They were once enemies, but now they were sitting together to discuss important matters. Cultivation was such a wonderful thing. In front of the great Tao, there was nothing that couldn't be abandoned. These people might be the most troublesome enemies, but under the same goal, they were the most resolute like-minded people. After the separation of Heaven's Choice was completed, they would return to being enemies. It looked like a casual child playing house, but in essence, they were the most resolute group of half-immortals. They had their own unchanging ideals and were willing to put in the greatest effort to achieve it. They were all monks, but hands-free, who had a good relationship with him, stood on the side of the Heaven Protector Association. There were also many of his former friends. Lu Xiaoyi didn't treat them as enemies. Under the Great Tao, it was normal to have different directions. This was the internal motivation for the universe's cultivation world to correct itself. It was a good thing. The marching monk proposed a very important measure. I think that from now on, we should encourage the urbanization of the mortal world in the Heaven's Choice continent. This is very important for the future casualties of Heaven's Choice's separation. Lu Xiaoyi raised his head. Is it better to distribute the population in the countryside? Or is it better to urbanize? Do you have an accurate deduction? Marching Monk was already prepared. Since he had joined the team, he was not willing to fall behind. This was the basic quality of a person who took on the role of a leader. If there was no freak like Lu Xiaoyi, This kind of major event would have been handled by Qing Xian's top half immortals like the military monk wearing a bamboo hat. However, under the halo of Lu Xiaoyi, they were reduced to supporting roles. There's no accurate deduction. That's because we don't even know which crack to start from. There was no such model. Spreading out in the countryside had its benefit. If they were scattered enough, they wouldn't be wiped out all at once. Gathering in a city has its advantages. It can greatly reduce the number of casualties, as long as we are accurate enough. But that's not the key point. The situation with Heaven's Choice is that there are too many rural villages and towns scattered around. I've roughly calculated that 80% of the mortals live in scattered areas. This is very dangerous. The marching monk's face was grim. The worst consequence of dispersing is that you won't listen to orders, and you won't leave even if you are beaten to death. Before the real separation, it is impossible for us to make them leave their homes and their spiritual and material sustenance with a single order. Therefore, instead of making things difficult, it's better to make preparations early. No matter what means we use, good or bad, crooked or evil, it's fine. Drive them to the city. Only after living in the city for several generations and dozens of generations will they have the obedience and discipline unique to the city people. We can also forcefully move them. We can't do this by ourselves. We need the strong support of the local cultivators of Heaven's Choice and hundreds of years of perseverance. As long as we reduce the population of the villages and towns to less than 50%, the number of casualties caused by our separation can be reduced by an order of magnitude. The man wearing a bamboo hat nodded repeatedly. In the short term, this is an inhumane measure, but in the long term, it's very useful. When doing big things, we can't be soft-hearted. Even if the process is painful, it's worth it. Lu Xiaoyi sighed in his heart. They were all outstanding people. To reduce the casualties of Heaven's Choice, the separation method was only one aspect. The control of the mortals was equally important. If the mortals could stay in the safest area during the separation, it would undoubtedly greatly reduce the casualty rate. However, for a region with hundreds of billions of people, it was extremely difficult. They could only use methods. Perhaps in the eyes of the so-called righteous people, it was a very cruel and inhumane method. Lu Xiaoyi was not an old-fashioned person, nor was he a moralist. In fact, he was the same type of person as these two people. In order to achieve their goals, they would do anything. Of course, the cruelty in the short term was for the benevolence in the long term. As the initiator of the separation of Heaven's Choice, he had to bear this responsibility. I agree with this suggestion. In the timeline, we still have at least 500 years. For the mortals, it's at least dozens of generations. We can definitely make it in time. However, have you thought about how to make the mortals willingly gather in the city? And not drive them away by force? The land is there, and there has to be someone to cultivate it. There has to be food to fill the stomachs of the people. We can't all go to the city and then drink the northwest wind together, right? The marching monk and the bamboo hat frowned. The direction of their thoughts was correct, but they lacked a strategy for the specific implementation. What Lu Xiaoyi said was the most realistic problem. How to gather the mortals to the city was not something that could be done with just a few words. They could only look at Lu Xiaoyi. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. There's a small world called Qingqiu. The people living there are fox people. The urbanization of their world is very concentrated. If you are interested, you can go and take a look. It will be very enlightening and won't take up much time. In my opinion, there are only two reasons why they can do this. First, their farming methods are advanced. They have integrated cultivation methods into all aspects of farming. The result is that an ordinary person can do the work of 10 people. There is no need for so many people to work in the countryside. The flow of people will naturally flow to the city. There is no need for us to force them. Naturally, they will know how to live a better life. Second, commercialization. Highly developed businesses can attract young people to the city, just like moths to a flame. If we can use this model as a reference, it is not impossible to achieve the urbanization of heaven's choice. The key is whether we have the perseverance and willpower to do so. This was not the life and death of a fierce wind or a raging fire, but the subtle influence of moistening things silently. If we succeed, not only will it reduce the casualties of heaven's choice, it will also have a profound impact on the mortal's way of life. In my opinion, the latter impact is even greater than the merit of saving billions of people. The marching monk and the bamboo hat looked at each other. Although we can't make a decision now, we can go to Qingqiu to take a look. Chapter 24:53. The initial stage of the dismantling of Heaven's Choice mainland was gradually unfolding. This was a complicated system project. There were still flaws in the organization and allocation. It did not have the scientific division of labor and strict system of a large project, but there were still strong points. For example, the high quality of the construction workers. Every one of them was a demigod. They were experienced workers who had been trained for at least thousands of years. Even if they were still a little rough in the overall deployment, they had a very strong subjective initiative in the specific implementation. They didn't need anyone to teach them what to do. Lu Xiaoyi received his own area, which was also one of the 3,000 areas. As a committee member, he had to set an example and take a good lead. This was also what all the committee members had to do. He did not dislike this kind of action, and did not feel that he was different from others. Therefore, he took the initiative to be sent to the most difficult and complicated area to carry out the mapping task. This was the attitude he should have. The committee also satisfied him. "Old man, give me some mapping tools. I don't have the patience to do those things, and I don't seem to have those materials," Lu Yuzi sighed. He had no other choice. After interacting with Lu Xiaoyi for a long time, he knew Lu Xiaoyi's temperament very well. He would definitely take advantage of others. Of course, Lu Xiaoyi looked for him and not others. This also represented a different relationship. "Inspector, every area like this is about the same size. The mapping points needed are also about the same, between 500 to 800. I will make 800 for you. You just have to distribute them evenly." Lu Xiaoyi generously swung his hand and threw 2 broken immortal equipment over. "I won't let you do it for free. Take these trash as the cost of production. Old man, you have to be more careful. There are too many people watching my position. I can't let anything happen and people will talk about it." Lu Yuzi smiled. "Don't worry, Inspector. Encryption and spirit dispenser. The shelf life is 3,000 years. If it breaks, you can find me and I will replace it for free." The old man had tens of thousands of years of wealth, so it was not difficult for him to do this. Moreover, he had even used some special means for him. He was even more attentive than doing it for himself. This was determined by Lu Xiaoyi's status. Lu Yuzi belonged to the group of die-hard loyalists in the committee. He did not have a clear opinion on whether or not Heaven's Choice should be split up. He belonged to the group of people who were reasonable no matter what. That was not the main point. The main point was to look at people. He believed that following escort Lu would have a higher chance of success than failure, so why should he worry about that? There were many others who had the same thoughts as him, such as the immemorial beast, his friend from the sword vein, and his old friend from the interior realm. Lu Xiaoyi carried the 800 mapping instruments and went on his way. In fact, each instrument was a palm-sized cube. Its only function was to record the boundaries of space. When the great path of space collapsed, it recorded the value of the spatial disturbance within a certain range. Then, through human calculations, it could determine the distribution of the underground plates. which boundaries were vague and difficult to divide, and which had natural boundaries that were easy to divide. The area he was assigned to was the location of a few small countries. It was a vast plain with fertile land. He did not know how it had become one of the more difficult areas among the 3,000 areas. He was too lazy to think about it. He had to hurry up and get to work. He plunged into the ground and began to arrange the instruments from shallow to deep. In theory, the arrangement of the mapping instruments only needed to be evenly distributed underground in this area. There were two difficulties here. First, the deeper one went, the greater the pressure, which had a high requirement for the cultivator's ability to travel underground. Second, when choosing the location of the instruments, one had to consider the influence of the surrounding environment. For example, it was not suitable to arrange the instruments in an underground river, and it could not be arranged in a soft place. The best place to arrange the instruments was a hard rock area, where it could record the spatial fluctuations clearly and truly. The area he was in was a square block with a radius of 3,000 miles. In the sky, such a distance was not worth mentioning, as it could be covered in a flash. However, if it was underground, it would be more troublesome. Lu Xiaoyi's 5 elements ability was at the peak of perfection, so this kind of operation was not difficult for him. After he arranged dozens of mapping points, he finally understood why no one was willing to take over this area. In his perception, he seemed to have lost contact with a few of the mapping points he had just arranged. This could not be the fault of the mapping instrument. Lu Yuzi's specially made instruments would not have a problem just after they were arranged. Then, it could only be because of sabotage. Lu Xiaoyi quickly returned to the mapping points and immediately discovered the truth of the matter. It turned out that there was another instrument next to his mapping instruments. The only function of this instrument was to affect the operation of the instruments. There was no doubt that this was done by the members of the Heavenly Guard Society. They did not directly destroy the instruments of the Heavenly Guard Society, as this would cause a fight. However, if you have the right to arrange the instruments, so do I, right? Therefore, he arranged the instruments nearby to interfere so that the instruments of the Heavenly Guard Society would not be effective. This was a very troublesome way to obstruct them. It made him realize that the collision between the two ideologies had reached an irreconcilable point. It must be resolved immediately. But first, he had to find the troublemakers. There were 3 people who did not deliberately hide their track. In their opinion, this was a competition of patience and willpower. However, they did not know who they had encountered. When will this kind of harassment end? How many interference devices do we have to arrange for the number of mapping points others have arranged? We are sneaking around like thieves. This is too unpleasant. A half-immortal complained. Another half-immortal bitterly smiled. There is no need to place interference devices everywhere. It is good enough if there are more than 10 places where we can express our attitude. If we place them all, who will pay for the resources? The last half-immortal reminded, stop complaining. This is our choice. The higher-ups also have such a request. I reckon that they do not really want to interfere with anything. In the end, both sides must reach a solution that everyone can accept. We can't just let them arrange things so easily while we do nothing, right? The 3 people complained, but their hands were very nimble. Very soon, they finished arranging the interference devices. Just as they were about to leave, they suddenly stopped. This was because they felt a dangerous aura approaching. They could not see the specific appearance of the person. In the dark underground, vision was basically useless. Divine sense was greatly restricted, and the range of their perception was reduced to an extremely small range. However, there was a sharp aura that was extremely cold and bone-piercing. It was as if the person was right beside them and could stab them at any time. At the same time, a divine sense rang out. Keep your own things. Don't make me do it. There will be no next time. Next time, you will talk to my sword. Chapter 2454. The three of them instantly understood who the person who had appeared was. This was also what the Heaven Protection Association had repeatedly reminded them to pay attention to when they were harassing others, to not use force. Who would have thought that they would actually hit the jackpot with a few thousand regions? The leader of the half-immortals said bitterly. Guard C. Lu Xiaoyi was too lazy to listen to his explanation. So what you mean is that you are going to interfere with how much I set up? The half-immortals explained. That's not the case. We are only going to interfere with a portion, just a few dozen. Lu Xiaoyi asked again. You will do this for every one of the 3,000 regions? The half-immortals shook their heads. No, only a portion, not more than 100. We don't have that many people. Lu Xiaoyi understood. I understand. Actually, both of our goals are to not cause a large loss of people in the Heaven's Choice continent. Our goals are the same, but our thoughts are the opposite. I am not here to persuade you, but you must understand that your so-called interference will only make things worse. You can argue, but you shouldn't use mortals as a bargaining chip, otherwise, no one will be able to escape from this responsibility. Especially you. We are doing it out of goodwill, but you are doing it to vent your anger and selfish desires. The nature of this matter is different. Go back and tell your Heaven Protection Association's manager that we can find an opportunity to use a cultivator's method to resolve the Tao dispute and not use such a childish method. This is meaningless. It will only lead to a meaningless battle. Go back and tell your so-called higher-ups that this is my, Lu Xiaoyi's, intention. Before this, I will let bygones be bygones, but after this, if I meet you again, I will think that you are deliberately trying to harm the mortals of the Heaven's Choice continent. My temper is not good. I hope that everyone can understand each other. After Lu Xiaoyi finished speaking, he was too lazy to listen to their reply and left, continuing to set up his mapping points. Smart people should be able to understand human language, and there were no idiots among the half-immortals. He had already understood that the other party's intention was not to interfere. This kind of countermeasure was too stupid. If the Heaven Splitting Association failed due to the borders being blurred, the Heaven Protector Association would have to bear the majority of the karma involved. This was a fact that was obvious. The Heaven Protector Association was unhappy with the Heaven Splitter Association's actions. They didn't care about the warnings of the Heaven Protector Association at all. What they wanted was a chance to decide the future of the continent through a Tao contest. He had already given them a chance just now. If they continued to pester him, he wouldn't kill them. This was tacit understanding. Without tacit understanding, one would not be able to survive in the cultivation world. Lu Xiaoyi plunged into the earth's core and began to carry out his responsibilities seriously. There were no more failures in the mapping points. Hundreds of mapping points had to be arranged evenly and rationally. The placement had to be appropriate and the specific underground structure had to be taken into consideration. There was no need to place them too close to each other in a location that was obviously a whole rock body. However, for those complicated underground structures, such as underground caves, underground rivers, underground veins, and different geological faults, they had to be carefully placed. These things had to be judged by his own knowledge of the five elements. In short, he had to place more of them wherever he felt it would be easier to break. This was something that every half-immortal who accepted a mission would do. The half-immortal realm had their own unique knowledge and judgment of the five elements. They were no longer elementary school students. This kind of work had taken him several years. He had to do it to the best of his ability. This was his principle. When he returned to the surface, he discovered that the dozens of interference transformations that he had placed on the surface were no longer there. And, at least he had some eyesight. He found the bamboo hat and the marching monk and obtained the information he needed. The bamboo hat said solemnly, "The committee has already reached an agreement with the Heaven Protector Association. We are just waiting for your approval." Both of us agreed that from now on, the Heaven Protector Association will no longer be a hindrance in our operations. In exchange, both sides will have a chance to solve the problem through the cultivation method. As for time, they want to do it as soon as possible while we want to delay. In the end, we came to a compromise and decided to do it when the 30th Great Tao collapses. The method has not been decided yet. They want to use the competition method, while we want to use the arena method. Lu Xiaoyi snickered in his heart. The competition method was, for example, 9 matches. The winner would decide the fate of the Heaven's Choice continent. The key point was that a particularly powerful cultivator could only participate in 1 match and wouldn't be able to play a big role. The specialty of the arena method was that the winner could continue to fight. If there was a particularly powerful cultivator as the arena master, then there was basically no chance of losing. The main point of the disagreement between the two sides was the use of Lu Xiaoyi. The Heaven Protector Association wanted to limit his usefulness, while the Heaven Splitter Association wanted to fully utilize his usefulness. In terms of absolute strength, the difference between the two sides was still not clear. The Heaven Splitter Association was basically a new power that was preparing to sharpen their heads to rise to the top. They had a certain advantage in terms of numbers, and as the new era approached, this advantage would only increase. However, their problem was that their leaders were all relatively young. The Heaven Protector Association had fewer people, but most of them were elites of various realms. They were old but strong. Many of them had been planted with immortal seeds and were dedicated to maintaining the status quo of the old cultivation method. In terms of combat strength, it was really a close match. No one had absolute confidence in winning. Everyone wanted to steer the situation towards their own side. Let's set the time first. As for how to win, there are still so many years left. We have enough time to slowly find a method that both sides can accept. Or perhaps we can borrow the strength of some special event. The bamboo hat monk nodded. This is also good. At least we can stabilize the situation first. These fellows' endless harassment is too disgusting. I'm afraid that some of them won't be able to control their emotions and turn the open and above-board Tao competition into a chaotic battle. This will be very disadvantageous to us. The marching army monk was a conspiracy theorist. We have to guard against those who are fishing in troubled waters and deliberately stirring up trouble. I think we should establish such an organization to combine the strength of both sides and focus on attacking those who are deliberately stirring up trouble. Under the committee's gradual improvement, the matters of the Heaven's Choice continent slowly got on the right track. Whether to split the Heaven's Choice continent or not, they had to make a decision when the 30th Great Tao collapsed. This was a compromise that both sides agreed on. In the current situation, no one could make a decision with just one word. During this period of time, Lu Xiaoyi spent a lot of time in contact with various powers, including those who were close to him and those who had different ideologies. Everyone's consensus was that they should solve the problem within the framework of the Tao competition and not cause another universe war. The Heaven's Choice continent was bustling with noise and excitement. However, this time, everyone understood that this was its final glory. The countdown for the number 1 world in the universe had begun. Chapter 2455. Just as Lu Xiaoyi had completed his surveying mission and was preparing to return to Yellow Dragon to look at his Tao tablet, news from Zhou Xian's Qingwei immortal sect finally arrived. Truly a life of hard work. Lu Xiaoyi wouldn't complain. In fact, Zhou Xian also had many demi-immortals of his own. Although there weren't many demi-immortals of the ancient techniques, this was the result of Zhou Xian's following the rules of cultivation. However, there were still many normal demi-immortals in the exterior realm. This was the foundation of a big world. However, in the process of changing eras, The demi-immortals in Zhou Xian didn't display their abilities in the turbulent times. They might not be bad, but compared to those true heaven's favored ones, they didn't seem to exist. When something major happened that involved the immortal court's upper realm, the cultivators of Zhou Xian would naturally trust figures like Lu Xiaoyi more than their own half-immortals, who were neither too high nor too low. This might be troublesome, but Lu Xiaoyi grew up in this kind of trouble, so he knew what the other side of trouble was. He had a good impression of Zhou Xian. It was also a blessed place in his cultivation process. He had an obligation to do something for it. This demi-immortal was too strange. Even a person with sharp senses like him felt uneasy. There wasn't much to do. The Heaven's Choice Continent was managed by the committee. Now that it was running smoothly and the dispute with the Heaven Protector Association had come to an end, there was no one to restrict him. He could come and go as he pleased. A month later, he quickly rushed back to Zhou Xian. In the sky above Qingwei Immortal Mountain, there were many people who came to welcome him. This made him very surprised. However, it wasn't just Hua Xing and Zhong Jiang. There were also a few other young spirit cultivators who came. There were familiar people like Bai Mei and Old Man Xian Xian. Dozens of young spirits all had serious expressions. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Exposed? Hua Xing's face was full of shame. Exposed? Although we have tried our best to investigate secretly, this guy is unusually cunning. He would feel uneasy if there was even the slightest movement of the wind. Lu Xiaoyi greeted the elders he was familiar with. Don't be anxious. Take your time. Hua Xing smiled bitterly. After Escort C left, we immediately started to investigate. Because he didn't want to alarm her, he did everything very carefully. Thinking that nothing major had happened in all these years, could it be that these few years were short? But after a few years, they didn't find anything. There was nothing wrong with the pearl, and her Tao companions were also fine. Hence, she relaxed a little. She thought that it was just like what GC said. Could it be that it was just an ordinary immortal planting the seed? Coincidentally, my Qingwei's old ancestor Yuan Yi and old ancestor Qing Huang returned to the mountain for a short stay, so I mentioned this matter to the two old ancestors. For the sake of safety, the two ancestors used a secret technique to make the final conclusion. Lu Xiaoyi nodded slightly. This Yuanyi Cheng Huang must be Qingwei's half-immortal grandmaster in the exterior heaven. They had a more direct understanding of immortals planting seeds. And they knew the severity of the matter. They must have been concealing their realm and strength. They thought that even if they did it personally, the Pearl, who was only a young spirit, wouldn't notice. This was the confidence of half-immortals and their understanding of the common phenomenon of immortals planting seeds in recent years. They knew that at this time, the immortal seed was actually just hidden in the cultivator's body. It was far from being effective. The yang spirit was still the yang spirit, and it wouldn't really have the ability of an immortal. But there were always accidents. Hua Xing frowned. This test obviously alarmed the immortal seed, but she endured it silently. The two old ancestors also found something strange. They thought that the pearl might have secretly given birth to a bastard while she was practicing dual cultivation. But we don't know what her intention is? We started to look for the descendants of her Taoist companions. Because it involved all the sects, we had to expand the scope of our knowledge. Lu Xiaoyi's expression didn't change. He knew very well what they meant. It was very troublesome to look for the descendants of cultivators from the mother's family, especially if they didn't want to alarm the pearl. Since it wasn't easy to start with the pearl, they started from her Taoist companions. Because they belonged to different sects and they were all monarchs with high status, it was easy to offend the public if they acted in private. So, they had to communicate with the higher-ups first. Hua Xing explained in detail, because there was an unknown immortal planting the seed and it was related to the monarchs of different sects, everyone was very vigilant and cooperated fully. They used the secret technique to look for the possible inheritance of the bloodline. Even the guards knew that when a cultivator reached the level of monarch, it was harder than reaching the sky to have descendants. So, we didn't think in this direction at first. But in the end, when we looked in this direction, we actually found that there were a few monarchs who had inherited the bloodline. Lu Xiaoyi looked at the Taoist in amusement. A few? I don't care about my face now. How many? Which sects do they belong to? Hua Xing gritted his teeth. 9, one from each sect. Lu Xiaoyi wanted to laugh, but he tried to hold it in. You mean there are 2 more monks? The monks from the Thousand Buddhas Imperial Sect and Bitter Zen Temple were a little embarrassed. But the fact was that their own sect had misbehaved, so they couldn't say anything. Hua Xing continued to be embarrassed. This situation was obviously intentional. The purpose was unclear, and we couldn't predict the means of the immortal seed. So, we decided to attack the pearl. At that time, to be more confident, we gathered 2 more Taoist half-immortals and 1 Bodhi of Thousand Buddhas. A total of 5 half-immortals attacked together. Thinking about it, with the pearl's yang spirit, even if there was an immortal seed in her body, it should be easy, right? But who knew that the pearl was very smart? When we figured out the situation and prepared to surround her, she ran out and ran into the core of Zhou Xian. The 5 ancestors followed her in and didn't come out again. We only saw that the lanterns were extinguished one by one. They must have been killed by the pearl. That's why we hurriedly sent a letter to the custodian and asked for help. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. All 5 are dead? Hua Xing's face was bitter. Because Xu Qingwei suffered the greatest loss, losing 2 ancestors at once. At this critical moment when the era was changing, it was undoubtedly a huge blow to the sect. They're all dead. We felt that even if we rushed in, it wouldn't mean much. We could only surround the core of the earth and prevent her from escaping. But for several months, we didn't see her rushing out. Who knows what kind of shady business she's doing inside? White Brows interrupted at this time. It was my idea to not go in easily. The enemy is in the dark while we are in the light. It's a big taboo to not know the enemy. We can still use the array to stop her outside the core, but we're blind once we enter the core. How can we be stronger than the 5 ancestors? So, we can only wait for you. Lu Xiaoyi took a breath. You really think highly of me? So you've left all the good things for me? Oh right, have you found the remnants of her bloodline? Hua Xing's face darkened. No. Through the secret bloodline technique, we're all pointing to the core of the earth. In other words, not only is the pearl in the core of the earth, but also her 9 children. As for whether the 9 children are in human form or some other form, we can't be sure without entering the core of the earth. Chapter 2456. Lu Xiaoyi did not delay. Although the ancestors of Zhou Xian could not be saved, the crux of the problem now was to stop the transformation process of this person. Without saying a word, he flew towards the Earth's core. The large group of sun spirits followed closely behind. He had been to the Earth's core of Zhou Xian more than once. The first time was when that idiot slug took a fancy to the great Tao of destiny and insisted on forming his nascent soul in the Earth's core. He almost died from his troubles. This was little Xiu's longing for destiny. The second time was when he was fighting against Heaven's choice and was dragged in by a monk called Minghui. It was also for the great Tao of destiny. This was the Buddhist monk's ambition for destiny. This was the third time. There were no coincidences in destiny, so there was no need to guess the purpose of this person. It must be for the so-called great Tao of destiny. It was just that the method was different. This was the immortals in heaven peeking at destiny. Although it was not connected, the context was clear and organized. It was no secret that the great Tao of destiny would not appear in the new era. Not to mention the immortals, even those in the lower realm who were obsessed with the old great Tao of destiny did not waste their efforts on destiny. There were countless Tao tablets in the land of the Yellow Dragon, and there were even some that did not exist. It was clear that there was no morality and no destiny. Then, what was this person who was implanted with the immortal seed plotting? This was what he was very curious about. Bai Mei walked side by side with him and cautiously instructed, "If something is wrong, come out immediately. Don't force yourself. Don't pretend to be someone important. Everyone makes mistakes. Once in a while is nothing. Before establishing a Tao, you know better than us old guys what is important." Lu Xiaoyi nodded in agreement. After all, they were on the same side and there was no hypocrisy. "Senior, what do you think about the 9 bloodline descendants of this person, or one from each of the 9 upper sects of Zhou Xian?" Old man Xian Xian beside him was clearly more skilled in this aspect. "All 9 sects are present. This is a dangerous signal. In my opinion, this means that this person's target is not a specific sect, but the entire Zhou Xian. What can Zhou Xian have that the immortals would like? Other than the great Tao of destiny, there is nothing else." The origin of destiny was nothing more than an excuse. The source that Xian Xian mentioned referred to the innate great Tao that had already been fused. When the fused cultivator gave up on this innate great Tao, it could also be said that after this great Tao collapsed, the fused cultivator would attain Tao. Fate itself did not have an origin. It existed everywhere in the universe. However, Tao integration stage cultivators had their own essence. It could be a place, an object, or an illusory concept. Due to the millions of years of Tao fusing experience, there was an unbreakable connection between the Tao fusing practitioners and the innate Taos. Even if the connection was broken, it would still affect the operation of the innate Taos to a certain extent, and it would gradually weaken over time. The place where the Tao-fated cultivators achieved their Tao was at the core of Zhou Xian. As for the upper realm of Zhou Xian, it was merely a modification of the place where the Tao-fated cultivators achieved their Tao. Old man Xian Xian's face was grave. Zhou Xian's foundation was in the 9 divine mountains, which later formed the 9 upper sects. Therefore, every upper sect disciple more or less possesses the jade spirit qi of the 9 divine mountains. The higher their cultivation level, the denser the jade spirit qi. It is deeply rooted in the cultivator's marrow and bloodline. Although I don't know if something like this that only belongs to the upper sects of Zhou Xian could be stolen, it doesn't seem impossible with the unpredictable immortal arts of the immortal court? Lu Xiaoyi understood. You mean that this person could have intercourse with the high-level true monarchs of the 9 upper sects to steal the acknowledgement of some bloodline? Then, in the core of the earth, through the acknowledgement of the 9 bloodlines, he achieved the acknowledgement of the mother body? By doing this, he wanted to obtain something from the origin of destiny? Bai Mei snorted. That should be the case. Although destiny is no more, the 4 fates still exist. Or perhaps, other post-celestial great Taos that originated from destiny might be a direction to take? Lu Xiaoyi's heart stirred. He suddenly understood. In the land of the Yellow Dragon, there were more than 30 pre-celestial great Tao tablets, and there were more than 1,000 of them. Among them, some were completely comprehended by the cultivators themselves, and some were secretly planted by the golden immortals. But no matter which kind, the contents of the tablets were somewhat different from the original pre-celestial great Taos. The difference was that the cultivators had added their own understanding of the new era. But morality and destiny were not the same. They were already destined to the lower realm, so these 2 pre-celestial great Taos were actually the great Taos that were most compatible with the change of eras. The origin of destiny was vaguely connected to the destiny of the lower realm. Then, if he obtained something from here, would he also obtain the understanding of the new era after the Taoist master of destiny turned into a Tao? With such a deep understanding, why would he not be able to achieve the great Tao? Even if he could not match destiny, there was still misfortune and destiny. What about the countless post-celestial great Taos that were derived from destiny? To be able to think of stealing from the origin of destiny that was destined to the lower realm, this immortal was not simple, and he was very bold. Most importantly, this gave Lu Xiaoyi an inspiration. If destiny could be stolen, could morality be stolen? If it could be stolen, where could it be stolen? Was it Qin Kong? He did not know. Seeing that Bai Mei and Xian Xian were still a little worried, he could not help but comfort them. Seniors, don't worry. This Ming Zhu is at most a person who may have mastered some special ability. One thing is certain, she is not an immortal yet. If she is not an immortal, there is nothing to be afraid of. If she can't beat me, she can always escape. It's not like I haven't been to the Earth's core before. That place is also my home ground. This was not an exaggeration. He was really fated with destiny, and it was even above Li Wuya's morality. Bai Mei snorted, those 9 lustful fellows were all placed in the Earth's core by us. If there is a need to make sacrifices, they will be the first batch. They have already caused the death of the 5 patriarchs of Zhou Xian. Their crimes cannot be punished. There was nothing wrong with what Bai Mei said. This was the iron law of the cultivation world. Whoever made a mistake had to clean it up. If they could not clean it up, they had to be ready to contribute at any time. But no one would spoil them. When one became a half-immortal, there was no such thing as atonement. It was just that this time, the blame was really wronged. Lu Xiaoyi was very careful. I heard that Ming Zhu's guests are not just these 9 people? Bai Mei nodded. That's right. In fact, in the past 1,000 years, we have only found 23 people who had an affair with these 9 people. There must be more that we do not know. Lu Xiaoyi frowned. If that's the case, if Ming Zhu only needs 1 seed from each of the 9 upper sects, why does she need to receive more than 10 people? Is it just a hobby? Or is there another reason? Daoist Xian Xian guessed. Could it be a trick? To confuse people? But we have also carefully asked them how long they have been together. Some of them have dual cultivated for a long time but did not leave behind any bloodline. Some of them were just putting on a show but were hit with a spear. Could it be purely because of their physique? This matter is really strange. Other than her, no one else can guess. Chapter 2457. The group soon arrived at the core of the earth, which had long been surrounded by Zhou Xian's cultivators. The death of the 5 ancestors was not a small matter. If it happened in the void, it would trigger a large-scale war. Almost half of the Zhenjuan in Zhou Xian had been transferred here because they did not want to let these 3 people leave freely. The core of Zhou Xian was divided into 4 layers: the halo, the crust, the pulp, and the core. Perceiving from the outside, there was no abnormality in the entire core, but they could be sure that the pearl was indeed inside. Lu Xiaoyi looked at the surrounding yang gods and said with a smile, "There's no need to be so tense. Relax. In my memory, Zhou Xian's characteristic is not to light soul lamps, but only the transportation lamps, right?" Bai Mei and the other yang gods nodded. "Xiaoyi, what do you mean?" Lu Xiaoyi suggested. "If it's not troublesome, why don't we stop the transportation lamps?" The yang gods looked at each other. They also realized the meaning of Abbot Lu's words. How could it not be troublesome? There were thousands of disciples in each sect, and there were countless transportation lamps. The process of lighting the lamps was complicated, and the process was not small. However, considering the practical problems, the yang gods in charge of these sects nodded one after another. Hua Xing said without hesitation, "We'll do it immediately. It's troublesome, but it's better than the core of Zhou Xian being damaged." Lu Xiaoyi smiled. "I'll go in slowly. You guys can extinguish the lamps outside. By the time I find her, the lamps will have been extinguished, right? In a flash, he disappeared into the halo. He did not let anyone go with him. This was his habit. When there was real danger, he did not have to take care of others. When he entered the halo, the familiar feeling reappeared, as if it had never left. In this place, the key to moving was to not circulate one's origin energy. Instead, one had to rely on one's own fate sense to move one's body. This ignored the cultivator's realm. Of course, powerful cultivators could rely on the thickness of their origin energy to force their way through, but it would consume too much energy and they wouldn't be able to last long. Moreover, if they spent too much energy on moving, how would they be able to deal with dangerous changes? In Lu Xiaoyi's opinion, the reason why the 5 Zhou Xian half-immortal patriarchs were defeated in the Earth's core was probably because they were caught in a dilemma. Although they were cultivators of Zhou Xian, their understanding of the Earth's core was not as good as the serene immortal seed. In fact, this was also a misunderstanding of the cultivation world of Zhou Xian. They regarded the Earth's core as the most sacred place, and they were unwilling to offend it easily. In the end, they were benefiting others. Wandering in the halo and spreading out his senses, he did not find anything wrong. However, he still patiently flew a few laps around the Earth's crust, both to familiarize himself with the environment and to wait for the lights outside to go off. Why did the lights go off? It was just his intuition. This Swerin obviously wanted to make a fuss about fate. If she could do something with the dual cultivation and birth bloodline, it was entirely possible that she could do more than just 9 people. The purpose of extinguishing the lights was to prevent her from taking advantage of the situation. 2 hours later, Lu Xiaoyi estimated that the lights outside had already gone off. He turned his body sideways and gently cut into the Earth's crust, directly arriving at the Earth's core. The Earth's core was the thickest place in the entire Earth's core. He still swayed in an unhurried manner. He began to focus on the Earth's core. If the Swerin was still here, she must be hiding in this place. This time, he did not wander too much in the Earth's core. He did not feel any abnormalities and immediately cut into the Earth's core again. As soon as he entered the Earth's core, it was incomparably clear. There were 9 nested embryos, each standing in a different direction, forming the 9 corners of the world. On each nested embryo there was a baby. Some were strong, some were weak, some had their eyes closed, and some were facing the sky. They were chained by blood chains, struggling and wandering, as if they were screaming about the unfairness of fate. Under the urging of their wills, traces of the power of fate gathered towards the center of the 9 nested embryos. There, a coquettish woman with disheveled hair seemed to be immersed in incomparable enjoyment. The woman was the Swerin Pearl. The 9 nested embryos were the bloodline that she borrowed from the 9 great sects. In fact, the bloodline was not important. What was important was the lingering aura of the 9 nested embryos. It was the aura that was only recognized by Zhou Xian after a long period of cultivation. It was transferred to the 9 nested embryos by her magic. Using the blood chains to bind them, she stimulated the aura of the nested embryos and used it to interrogate fate. In the struggle with fate, she obtained the latest understanding of fate from the origin of fate after so many years in the lower bound. However, he still did not know what the Swerin Pearl could do from such an understanding. This method of Tao seeking was indeed novel, but it was also cruel. Zhou Xian lost 5 ancestral shamans. In the cultivation world, it was not a big deal. This was the fate of cultivators. The winner was the king while the loser was the bandit. It was normal for one to take action when one's ability was not good enough. However, the refinement of these 9 nested embryos was beyond the bottom line of human cognition. The reason why the Swerin Pearl dared to do this was that Lu Xiaoyi was also very clear about what she relied on. Firstly, the Immortal's technique was brilliant, and there was a possibility that it could be established technically. Secondly, the Swearen Pearl was not a human, so she could not be bound by human moral concepts. Third, the relationship between them was the mother and the child. Among the demonic beasts, devouring one's own bloodline wasn't an unforgivable sin. There were many powerful beasts, including the immemorial beasts, that had the tradition of devouring the weakest bloodline after it was born, and only keeping the strongest bloodline. This was also the default rule of the race's survival by the heavenly axiom. You could not measure all living creatures with human concept. It was precisely because of these many reasons that such a tragic act of gathering luck, which was unbearable to look at in the eyes of humans, was taken for granted in the bead. During the process of implementation, there was no punishment from the heavenly axiom. However, Lu Xiaoyi was very clear that such an act had violated the bottom line of the heavenly axiom. If it was in the past, the heavenly eye's punishment would immediately come. But now, the heavenly eye could not even take care of itself. 2 of the 4 immortal monarchs in charge were gone, and the remaining 2 were still in fear all day long. They did not know when it would be their turn. Their attention was focused on how to establish a seed in the mortal world. How could they be in the mood to care about other people's business? These judgments were already clear with just a glance at the situation of the Earth's core. Until now, with his understanding of the Great Tao, knowledge of the immortal court, and familiarity with the Earth's core in Zhou, it was not difficult for him to make the right judgment. He saw the Swearen Pearl, and the Swearen Pearl also saw him. Obviously, the Swearen Pearl was not unfamiliar with his origin. She opened her eyes and smiled. "Isn't it a pleasure to have friends from afar? What do you want to teach me this time?" Lu Xiaoyi sighed. "In front of exalted immortal, I dare not teach you. But exalted immortal's actions in Zhou, isn't it a bit overboard?" The Swearen Pearl was very serious. "What are the rules? Can you give me a standard? Or is it something that can be done by golden immortals and not by others? It's just a different method. How is it overboard?" Lu Xiaoyi was also very serious. "Isn't it a bit bloody?" The Swearen Pearl smiled. "You said that I was bloody, but if you did not interfere in this matter, it would have been a very peaceful process in the first place. Those 5 half-immortals would not have suffered. I would naturally leave when I achieved my goal. So, does the Swearen not have any responsibility for the bloody scene?" Chapter 2458. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. What the 3 of them said seemed to make sense. "You're a human, and I shouldn't be using human etiquette to restrain you. But the problem is, everything you do has something to do with humans. Do you dare to say that all of this is your personal business? So, fellow Taoist, you can't be too clear about it. You know who's right and who's wrong. Who can hide it from who?" Yuan Shizhu spread her hands. "Then there's no other way. Actually, it's useless to say so much. I'm imparting my Tao while you're doing it for the so-called righteousness. It's not the same thing. I've been in Zhou for more than 1,000 years, and I don't think I've committed any great sins. I didn't kill the innocent and didn't cause any trouble. I just opened the door and imparted 9 streams of blood essence to the 9 sections. I also cultivated it with my own bloodline. It doesn't seem to have hindered anyone, right? Why is it that now, in your eyes, I've become an unpardonable evil? Those 5 half-immortals in Zhou attacked without any reason. They deserved to die. It's not my fault. As for what you want to do, the choice is yours. As far as I'm concerned, I don't want to be your enemy. Everyone has their own Tao. That's all." Lu Xiaoyi nodded to express his understanding. "Then, you and I will fight here. The winner takes all." Yuan Shizhu raised her head and said regretfully, "I thought that you were a reasonable person, but I didn't expect that the so-called representative of the new power would still stick to the rules. He's old-fashioned and conservative, holding on to those outdated ideas. What a pity, what a pity! Lu Xiaoyi was unmoved. His eyes started to become sharp. This was a sign that he was about to kill someone. Yuan Shizhu could feel his aura. It was completely different from those half-immortals in Zhou. Even a quasi-immortal like her, who had partially activated her immortal seed's power, could feel danger. When she was in Qingwei Immortal Sect, she was still a young spirit. After entering the Earth's core and comprehending the changes of fate, she naturally became a half-immortal. But compared to those old half-immortals who had lived for thousands of years, there was still a big gap in cultivation. But she also had her own advantages. That was the complete awakening of her immortal seed's consciousness. In addition, she was in the Earth's core, which was a special environment where she couldn't use her cultivation. Fighting in this kind of place requires special skills. Unfortunately, the majority of half-immortals aren't good at this kind of thing. The 9 embryos began to faintly move, and their roars became even more mournful. Under the restraint of the blood chains, they were ferocious and terrifying. Such a scene would often make human cultivators filled with righteous indignation, and then they would brazenly attack without caring about anything else. This was the effect she wanted to achieve by creating such an atmosphere. Can you tell me why you insist on fighting to the death? Lu Xiaoyi sneered. Because that's what you want to do too. His eyes narrowed, and a sword light slashed down diagonally. Yuan Shizhu didn't have time to think about it. Her body didn't move, and the entire space around her seemed to have turned into a big hole. It began to devour any energy that approached it. The moment the battle began, it was actually the end. Because there was no room for them to play tricks here. Lu Xiaoyi wasn't stupid enough to use his flying sword here. What he used was his newly comprehended ability, the purple sword will. Under this kind of will, even the special environment of the Earth's core couldn't cause any hindrance to him. Of course, this also included the new great Tao that his opponent comprehended from fate. Under one attack, Yuan Shizhu's body was completely destroyed. She was only a half-immortal, so how could she resist the purple qi that was on the same level as the 4 great beasts? In this aspect, Lu Xiaoyi took advantage of it. It was also because Yuan Shizhu was too confident in her newly comprehended Tao realm and the special environment here. She didn't expect that her body would be so weak under the swordsman's sword. This was the result of pulling up seedlings to help them grow. Her reliance was effective against the 5 half-immortals, but it was useless against Lu Xiaoyi, who didn't walk the normal path. In fact, if it was another experienced half-immortal here, they wouldn't be defeated so easily. However, she was defeated because of the disharmony between the immortal's consciousness and the half-immortal's body. Yuan Shizhu's body was destroyed, and the 9 embryos lost their mother. They began to become sluggish. Without a source of energy to absorb, they quickly withered. This was also Lu Xiaoyi's unique intuition towards battles. He didn't choose to attack the embryos, but went straight for the core. However, Yuan Shizhu didn't die. In other words, that immortal's consciousness didn't die. Floating in the Earth's core, the source of destiny, she couldn't be killed for the time being. She wasn't even flustered and exasperated. Escort Lu. You live up to your reputation. In this world, no one can block this sword intent. However, I still don't understand. How did you know that I was deliberately waiting for you here? Lu Xiaoyi wasn't in a hurry. A proper immortal's consciousness wasn't that easy to destroy. Although his sword intent was enhanced by the purple color, the color wasn't deep enough. He still needed time to strengthen it. Therefore, he didn't mind answering some questions. In the process of answering, he found the root of this immortal's weakness. Since your immortal has already awakened, the plan has already begun. You should be able to sense that I was spying on you in Mount Qingwei's cave. You purposely gave yourself away. Wasn't it to attract my curiosity? The immortal sighed. Just based on this guess? Lu Xiaoyi satisfied her curiosity. Of course not. Forgive me for being blunt, but you have plenty of loopholes. Let's talk about the most important point. In my opinion, your new great Tao had already succeeded not long after you entered the Earth's core, right? You still didn't want to leave. Instead, you deliberately killed 5 Zhou Xian half-immortals. Wasn't it to lure me here? Everyone knows about my relationship with Zhou Xian. It's not a secret. You knew very well what would happen if you stayed here, yet you still didn't leave. Your motive couldn't be any clearer. Finding trouble with me. Is this the price you paid for not being pursued when you came down? Lu Xiaoyi's words pierced her heart, purposely showing weakness. It's not that you don't want to fight, but you want to numb my fighting spirit? You're so scheming. Who exactly is supporting you? The immortal changed the topic. Maybe I just want to be friends with you? For me, it's not easy to find a chance to get close to you. Lu Xiaoyi sneered. We can't be friends because I don't approve of your great Tao. If I'm not wrong, what you comprehended from the source of destiny is the opposite of destiny. The great Tao of oblivion? The great Tao that the Black Pearl Immortal used was oblivion. This was a brand new great Tao that had appeared for the first time. Its core concept was self-indulgence and going with the flow. Others were fighting against destiny, but oblivion was submitting to destiny and becoming worse under destiny. It existed for a reason. However, such a great Tao was a malignant tumor. It would cause bloodshed in the cultivation world that was still considered normal. Its final direction was to become a demon. It was also after entering the Earth's core and discovering this point that Lu Xiaoyi really had the intention to kill. The Black Pearl Immortal disguised her oblivion as devouring. It was a very confusing method. It might be able to fool others, but it couldn't fool Lu Xiaoyi, who had a fetish for devouring. Chapter 2459. P.S. Looking for monthly votes at the end of the month. Brothers, let's count the monthly vote. Only by staying in the top 100 will Qidian give out the funds. Sloth thanks everyone here. Stealing fate into oblivion, she was also a talent. However, this also made Lu Xiaoyi vigilant. He had already started to come into contact with the dark side of the immortal court. Under the bright and upright innate Tao, how many more shadows were there? These immortals were the ones who did not follow the rules. When the immortal court was orderly, they silently endured. When the era changed and the rules were loose, they risked everything. The way they did things was fearless, and the Tao they created was fearless as well. To her, since she had comprehended the Tao, she could give up on the body. She only needed to find the next suitable body. Therefore, she was fearless in this attack on Lu Xiaoyi. Once there were no restrictions, the possession would be completely uncontrollable. Obviously, this immortal did not care about the time when the era changed. Instead, her target was after the era. She still had a lot of time to complete the control of another body. This process would be very dangerous because the heavenly Tao would eventually react to the immortal's possession method. However, the identity of immortals gave them many ways to avoid it. For example, they did not possess high-level cultivators, but only low-level cultivators. They could use a long time to escape the attention of the heavenly Tao. One advantage was that the heavenly Tao would naturally adapt to the changes due to the change of the Tao in the new era. Therefore, the heavenly Tao would become vague about the old era. In short, the road was very difficult, but it was not over yet. The immortal spirit disagreed. Shouldn't oblivion become the Tao? She was purely asking from the perspective of the Tao, so Lu Xiaoyi did not refuse to answer. It should. But it should not be in this new era. It might appear in the Age of Chaos, or the next new era, or the next one. But I know it's definitely not this one. I'm sorry, you're taking too big a step. In the process of answering the immortal spirit, Lu Xiaoyi finally secretly established some kind of connection with the Earth's core destiny origin. He had such a foundation, and there was some sort of connection between him and the Grand Tao of Destiny here. This came from many aspects. Most importantly, the Tao Lord of Destiny had stood on the side of morality. If the Tao Lord of Destiny was still alive, then he wouldn't even need to lift a finger to kill this immortal. But now that the Tao Lord was gone, the most he could do was establish a weak connection with the icy cold Grand Tao. Once Xianling understood what the swordsman was thinking, she felt that she had gained a lot. This kind of question and answer was actually a kind of gamble. She wanted to know where she had exposed herself. And the swordsman was trying to make her stay. She has lost the battle of life and death, but she is confident that she can turn around and leave. Without her body, the Zhou cultivators outside are just decorations. Your purple qi is very interesting. I can't block it. Now that I'm leaving, you have one chance to stop me. Make good use of it. Xianling shook, and her spirit split into 9 parts, entering the 9 withered embryos. In an instant, the 9 embryos seemed to come to life, struggling to spread out. As they spread out, they turned into different images. 9 people, 5 women and 4 men. 9 images, 9 vivid and lifelike images, waved goodbye to him at the same time. Lu Xiaoyi immediately understood how the fairy had escaped. In the end, she had still given birth to 9 bloodlines. However, these 9 bloodlines had their spirits extracted here, and their bodies were buried outside the Zhou. Could it be a meteorite? A planet? Wait, on the subsidiary planets around Zhou. Once the images here disappeared, Xianling would be transferred to that planet and escape. With Lu Xiaoyi's speed, it would take him at least 15 minutes to rush out of the Earth's core, out of Zhou atmosphere, and into the void of the universe. He wouldn't make it in time. The only clue was that Xianling's true body would appear in the images. In order to hide him, Xianling had designed 8 fake images for herself. For Lu Xiaoyi, who had never been to the immortal court, it was impossible to distinguish the real from the fake. Split into 9 sword Tao wills? Lu Xiaoyi couldn't do it, because wills couldn't be split. This was the only shortcoming of the purple sword Tao wills. What was half of the wills? If the wills couldn't be gathered, would there still be colors? Not to mention being divided into 9 parts. Xianling was very shrewd, and instantly gave him a difficult problem. Even the method of identifying the past wouldn't work, because 8 of them were fake and didn't exist. The time left for him was very short, a few breaths. When the images were at their clearest, they began to fade. When they completely faded, it meant that the transfer was successful, and he didn't even know whether this Xianling was male or female. The 9 men and women in the images had a mocking look on their faces as they waved goodbye, as if mocking him for wasting his effort. Lu Xiaoyi gathered his sword Tao wills and stabbed forward without hesitation. One of the images was stabbed, and the image disappeared. A man was struggling in the air. How is this possible? How did you know? You can't even see through heaven's secrets. The sword Tao wills didn't relax, and firmly stabbed the man's body, making him unable to escape. Xianling quickly withered under the invasion of the purple qi. Lu Xiaoyi acted out of character, and didn't satisfy his curiosity before he died. He was never a person who liked to talk too much during a battle. Previously, he spoke so much just to delay time and communicate with the Destiny Source. Unfortunately, the communication wasn't enough to complete the judgment. Proud, he said, in my life, I'm best at making multiple-choice questions. Especially multiple choice. Xianling's struggle slowly subsided. At least before he died, he acted like a real Xianling and didn't curse. Under the purple sword Tao wills, his curses wouldn't have any effect. The main image was destroyed, and the other 8 images were also destroyed, which meant that this hunt was over. Xianling was very depressed, but his actions all these years had actually left traces. From an operational point of view, he only needed 1 bloodline from each of the 9 upper sects. In other words, he only needed to find 9 cultivators, and didn't need to find more than 20. Xianling descended to the mortal world, so how could she easily tolerate being dual cultivated? This was the basic pride of an Xianling. There was only one reason why she still did it, and that was that she wasn't familiar with gestation. Lu Xiaoyi had come into contact with the Ho people's family, and knew that this race was special. They were very good at gestation, and the Xianling had to be born in this race, probably because of their strong gestation ability. However, there were still many failures, which could only mean that the Xianling wasn't a Kuan Xianling, but a Qian Xianling. Therefore, the real body could only be among the 4 baby boys. How to choose the best one among the 4 baby boys? His method was very simple, and that was to look at the size of the tool. As for the coiled infant, of course, it was naked. Its size was obvious at a glance. In the subconscious of humans, there was one thing that could not be tolerated, and that was its shortness. Sounded like child's play? But the logic behind it was very real. Lu Xiaoyi was a person who was very good at grasping details, and he was right. Chapter 2460. This was not a pleasant experience, and there was no sense of satisfaction. Killing was not satisfying, and dealing with things was dragging on. Under the Great Tao, there were many choices that were made out of helplessness. The Great Tao of Oblivion was actually a very novel direction. He felt that this kind of negative Great Tao would appear in the connate Great Tao sooner or later. It was also inevitable after the extreme development of the cultivation world. However, he wasn't sure if it should appear in this new era. He slowly withdrew from the core. He could feel that it was not appropriate to call this place the origin of destiny. The destiny factor here was already very faint, and after being stimulated by this immortal, it became even fainter. In the end, this place would return to normal, and no trace of the Great Tao would be left behind. Because of time, because of all kinds of accidents, and because of the determination of the Tao Lord of Destiny. He admired the magnanimity of the senior Zenith Heaven Golden Immortal. The lower realm was the lower realm. He did not leave any room for himself to make a comeback. When the new era began, destiny and morality would become the standard of all humans, and not the exclusive property of cultivators. This was not noble character, but a true understanding of these 2 great Taos. Li Wuya and the Tao Lord of Destiny were probably the only 2 among the 36 golden immortals who had pushed the connate Great Tao to the extreme. I salute you. Outside the core, a group of young gods looked at him eagerly. Bai Mei came up to him. It's done. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. It's done. Pay attention to the 9 supremes and check their mental state. I don't know if the death of Yuan Shizhu has any effect on them, but at least their path of Tao is over. This was the price. When the 9 nascent soul plates died, their most precious thing was taken away. With some interest, Lu Xiaoyi directly set off for Heaven's Choice, and then from the Sword Tao Steel to the Yellow Dragon Land. He needed to find a way to express the color of his Sword Tao Will in his Tao Steel in the land of the Yellow Dragon. He needed to be quiet for a while to prepare for the imminent collapse of the Great Tao. According to the flow of time, the next Great Tao would be soon. If there were 2 more at once, it would be the juncture for him to take the second step. Over the years, as more and more people came to the land of the Yellow Dragon, the number of Tao tablets in the surrounding space began to increase crazily. Those that should be erected had already begun to erect Tao tablet. Those that did not erect Tao tablets now were unlikely to do so in the future. This was the best time to accept the test of the cultivation world. There were close to 10,000 Tao tablets in the surrounding space. This number was about the same as when the Heaven's Choice continent was at its peak. There were many new creations, but of course there were even more new bottles of old wine. It didn't matter what kind of wine it was, as long as it could make people drunk, it was good wine. His sword Dao steel and Dao Qi crown had already exceeded 500,000 feet. They were considered the most dazzling batch in the entire space. Within the top 100. For a purely spiritual type Dao steel that didn't have a systematic meaning, this result was already amazing. Those standing in front of him were mostly 36 old Xiantian cultivators. After such a long period of time, the differences in the Dao aura emitted from the tablets of different cultivators began to reveal the true strength of the cultivators. For example, the Great Void Dao tablet. There were nearly 100 people who had the confidence to erect a Great Void Dao tablet in the land of the Yellow Dragon. Nearly 100 Great Void Dao steels. But there were only 3 that exceeded 500,000 feet. Among them, there was definitely one that was planted by a golden immortal. Or maybe all 3 of them were planted. The highest Dao Qi crown Dao steel was the Tai Chi Dao steel, which was 700,000 feet tall. This choice also represented the vision of the lower realm cultivators towards the new era's great Dao. They all knew that in the new era, the human's great Dao would obtain more seat. Therefore, among all the old Xiantian great Daos, those great Daos that combined humans and nature were the most sought after. Just like Tai Chi, of course, in the future there would be even more sought after great Daos, such as the 5 elements, yin and yang, etc., but they had not collapsed yet. Lu Xiaoyi's sword Dao steel was ranked in the last 10 places. The main reason was that he, the person who established the Dao, was not around all year round and lacked communication. It was not that there was a problem with the sword Dao steel itself. This ranking was in line with his own expectations. It was still far from the time for him to establish his Dao, so there was no need for him to become the target of public criticism now. This was because he felt that he could not stay in the land of the Yellow Dragon for long. There were always countless troublesome things waiting for him. After entering the sword Dao steel, he injected all his gains from the sword Dao will into it. He did not avoid the question about the purple gas. After the ancient filthy soil was dyed with the color, his actions could no longer be hidden from those who wanted to. Instead of sneaking around, it was better to be open and aboveboard. The key was that although he could not stay here all the time, he did not want to be too far away from the front. He had to at least stay in the first group. This required an extra motivation. The purple gas was the best indication. At this time, the number of cultivators in the land of the Yellow Dragon hovered around hundreds of thousands all year round. The main force had changed from half-immortals to perfected immortals. Occasionally, there were also a few Yuanian cultivators. These people were all considering whether their lifespan could last until the new era. They wanted to observe the great Dao, enrich themselves, improve their abilities, and prepare for their future Dao establishment. In the universe, in terms of opportunities, there was no place that was more concentrated than this place. It became the only place in the universe's cultivation world where the great Dao was born. When the sword Dao steel was erected for the first time, Lu Xiaoyi was in the limelight. He became the only Dao steel in the surrounding space that was purely made of spirit and willpower. He was chased by cultivators who wanted to change their minds. Now, the sword Dao steel became the most dazzling one in the surrounding space again. Because it was the only one that had color. Dao steels should not have color. They were all of a uniform style. They were dark and ancient. However, the Dao Qi crown could have color. This was a phenomenon that would only occur when the Dao realm was close to the standard of establishing Dao. For example, the 5 elements steel. When its Dao Qi crown began to turn colorful, it meant that it had met the basic requirements of establishing Dao. The rest was to compare it with the other 5 elements steels and decide which one was the most colorful. However, at the current stage, no Dao steel could do this. They were still accumulating. The purity and thickness of their Dao realm were still improving. There were only traces of inconspicuous color changes that were faintly mixed in with the Tao Qi crown. However, you had to admit that as long as there was a trace of color abnormality, it would attract everyone's attention. This was because it already had a trace of the possibility of Tao unification. Among these people, there were those who were sincerely devoted to it. They were those who wanted to learn and accompany the Tao stele as it grew. They wanted to do their part in the improvement and change of the great Tao. This would be very beneficial to their future Tao establishment. If they could prove that their vision was not bad in the future, they could point at this tall building and proudly say, "I have also added bricks and tiles to it." Chapter 2461. There were those who walked the righteous path, but of course, there were also those who wholeheartedly took shortcut. There were also those who snuck in to say something shocking to get familiar with. There was no other reason than that you might be greeting a future golden immortal. If you missed this period of establishing your Tao, where would you find such an opportunity? Whether there were any specific benefits was still unknown, but at least it was something to brag about. Such people, instead, made up the majority. There was no ranking at the Yellow Dragonland, but the existence of the Tao Qi magnificent crown itself was a kind of ranking in disguise. It was just that it was not listed out clearly, but in every cultivator's heart, there was such an account. Towards the top 100, those with the highest Tao Qi magnificent crown could all be counted in their hearts. Mixing in the Yellow Dragonland, this was a must. The Tao Qi magnificent crown was the monthly votes ranking, the sales ranking, the popularity ranking, the collection ranking, and the recommendation ranking. Finally, all the rankings would be added, and the heavenly Tao would choose who was the great god Platinum, who was the mighty Ceres, and who was the flop. Lu Xiaoyi's Tao tablet took the lead again. His Tao Qi magnificent crown did not have any color, but the Tao tablet itself was faintly covered with a layer of purple mist. What did this mean? No one could understand. But this did not stop every curious cultivator from coming in to take a look. The sword Tao tablet had a new change. The moment they came in, there was a row of shining golden words, naked, crude, and simple, begging for votes. Begging for votes. Begging for subscriptions. Begging for collections. Begging for recommendations. Begging for rewards. Begging for anything that could be begged for. An ugly face that unscrupulously climbed up, in the hypocritical atmosphere of the Yellow Dragonland, was so out of place but so sincere and direct. Humans were like this. When you are used to a certain form, if a new form suddenly appeared, so different from the rest, and just so happened to cater to the mentality of all cultivators who dreamed of climbing up, then it would often be crazily sought after outside of reason. Separated for a long time, united for a long time, divided for a long time, the universe's cultivation world had not changed for millions of years, laughing on the surface, throwing knives behind the back. People had long been tired of such hypocrisy. Suddenly, someone openly came out to solicit votes and support, tearing apart that layer of cloth. The effect was really unexpected. Lu Xiaoyi's original intention was to move up a little bit to give himself a certain amount of advance. His current position was a little awkward. If he ran out to be carefree for a few hundred years, he might lose his position in the top 100 and no one would pay attention to him. This is an era where you need to promote yourself. If you want to keep a low profile and develop your strength, no one will care about you. The sword Tao tablet, which was completely different from other Tao tablets, made the sword Tao tablet, once again, the focus of attention. The Dao, which was the Tao Qi magnificent, the Dao jade tablet, from the top, the rank, from rank, the rank, from rank to the rank. It was as if someone had tipped the purple gold league. It might not last long, but as long as it occupied this position for a day, there would be a day of crazy traffic. It was the habit of humans, no matter if you were ranked first or not. If you were ranked first, there was a reason for you to be ranked first. There would be people who would chase after you. Even if it was feces, they would praise it to be golden feces, treasure feces, immortal feces. A completely careless hype, but it brought Lu Xiaoyi extraordinary achievements. He had to admit, in the current land of the Yellow Dragon, some things had begun to go out of shape, and his emotions were serious. This was also a process in establishing one's Tao. Lu Xiaoyi was in pain and happy at the same time, pleading for votes. He was the first person in the universe's cultivation world to openly state his own wishes. He no longer pretended to be calm and unaffected. His mouth wanted to refuse, but in fact, he wished he could just lie on the bed and open the door wide. This catered to the mentality of all the cultivators who did not have the qualifications to establish their Tao. I don't care who establishes their Tao, but would it kill you to say the word plead? Do you have to use a certain tone? If I cast this vote, I should at least have some psychological comfort, right? In the beginning, a certain great golden immortal also begged me. My heart softened. Forget it, I will reward him. Of course, there was also a driving force behind him, and it was a very powerful force. The Eastern Sky Alliance, with the fifth ring as the center, relied on him to eat. His friends in the inner and outer scenic sky, and the huge number of members of the sky-splitting society. Nothing was really accidental, and such things did not exist in the cultivation world. But for the majority of cultivators who were looking forward to change, seeing a brand new Great Tao pressing down on the old Great Tao was a kind of psychological incomparable satisfaction. Especially when it was a kind of spirit. Change, what it lacked the most was a kind of spirit. Because there were already many cultivators who came, Lu Xiaoyi began to receive people from various forces in the sword Tao steel. There were friends, and there were also opponents. The Great Tao was not personal, but the Tao fusing was a real human. While examining the Great Tao, the personal character of the Tao fusing was equally important. Those who knew him did not need it, but in the cultivation world of the universe, those who did not know him were the majority. Those who could directly come into contact with him were basically at the half-immortal level. It was not that he set a threshold in the realm, but there were too many people. If he received them one by one, he did not have to do anything. He might not even be able to receive them until the end of the era. Several elephant heavens, various big worlds, different orthodoxies, Taoist and Buddhist giants. There were often half-immortals who came in to discuss the Tao with him. They did not represent themselves, but the forces behind them. What they wanted to understand was, once you obtained the Tao, how would you use this great Tao in the future? Would you turn the new era into a reign of terror? Or would you still abide by the rules in an orderly environment of competition? Would you completely indulge? Or would you change your self-discipline? There must be an explanation for all of this, so that these big forces could decide whether they would sincerely support you in the future. On this point, Lu Xiaoyi was very firm. He still put order in the first place. He put change under order, forming orderly changes under order, and not doing whatever he wanted in a mess. Change was imperative, but order had to be followed. Thus, it returned to a key question: what was the foundation of the new era's order? It could be foreseen that those natural great Taos were still strong, such as the 5 elements, yin and yang, time and space, karma and reincarnation. But it was very difficult for these natural great Taos to form a system in the order of the great Tao. What everyone wanted to know was, what were the characteristics of the human great Tao system in the future? How could it reflect the difference between the old and new eras? Lu Xiaoyi could not tell them in detail now. One thing in common was that in the future, such changes in the order would definitely be approved by most cultivators. They might exist in the near 10,000 Tao steels in the current space, washing the sand in the waves, and finally reveal themselves in the hearts of the people. As time passed, the new era was getting closer and closer, and the true direction would become clearer. Chapter 2462. There were also those who came as a whole. For example, the ancient dirt earth half-immortals who were beaten into submission. They came to Yellow Dragon and truly felt the pressure of the era's change. Different from the dirt earth's constant rhythm, this place changed every day. The great Tao rose and fell one after another, too much for the eye to take in. The collision between conservative forces and emerging forces, the collision between Buddhism and Taoism, the competition between the lower realm and the immortal court, etc. It extended out and involved even more aspects. For example, the Heaven's Choice continent. After witnessing such a grand spectacle, it would be difficult for you to remain uninvolved and watch from the sidelines. Only by throwing in, joining, and mixing in would a cultivator's only way out. Otherwise, you would be abandoned by the era. Lu Xiaoyi's greatest gain at this stage was the visits from the different sword vein in the universe. The universe was vast, and Xianyuan was not the only sword vein. Perhaps they might not be as dazzling as Xianyuan, but there were also many ancient and powerful inheritances. Sky-raising sword vein, Nether Passage sword vein, Goemmo sword vein, Jixia sword vein, Shangxie sword vein, Pangu sword vein, and so on. These were the few great sword vein in the universe. There were also some that could not participate, such as Shi Zhao, Tianlong sword vein, and so on. In comparison, Zhou Xian's 9 colors sword vein was not on the same level. To convince these people and obtain their approval, there was no other way. There was only one word: battle. In the sword Dao Steel, these heroes of the sword all died under Lu Xiaoyi's sword. Only then did he truly establish his position as the leader of the sword vein. This was a process, using strength to prove one's reputation. In addition to his legendary experiences, he finally reached this step. The process was bumpy, but success came naturally in the midst of difficulties. The sword vein also needed a true core, a person who could represent their interests. Now it seemed that other than Lu Xiaoyi, there was no one else who could do it. The Xianyuan sword vein had finally reached the peak of the sword vein and gained the recognition of all the sword vein because of the emergence of Li Wuya and Escort Lu. In the process of his cultivation, he had never deliberately pursued the unifying universe sword vein, because he believed that it was useless. With the swordsman's temper, how could he make them submit to him so easily? Only in special times and special events could this be achieved, just like now. You don't need to go around trying to win them over, they will naturally gather around you on their own accord. This was a loose alliance. Due to the long distance and scattered distribution, their alliance was more of a symbol than anything else. It was obvious that they would also scatter after the new era. This was the characteristic of the sword vein. But now they were Lu Xiaoyi's strongest backing, the strength that he could entrust to his back. He was not the only one who gathered the strength to support him. In fact, everyone who established their Tao was doing so. But for most cultivators, their influence was limited to their own domain and their own orthodoxy. It was very limited, it was a disguised form of streaking and playing alone. But there were also those who supported the majority, mainly concentrated in Taoism and Buddhism. Their overall strength and huge base determined all of this. Most of the Tao steels in the top 100 were in this situation. There were very few unorthodox sects that could really stand out. In a battle of Tao, especially a battle of Tao between eras like this, the final comparison would definitely include the power behind it. This was also the tacit rule of the heavenly Tao. In his spare time, He also had time to understand the Dao steels in front of him and his friend's Dao steels. Basically, everything was within his expectations. Among the 10 steels with the highest Dao aura, there was Qing Xian's yin-yang Dao steel that he was familiar with. As the Dao of yin-yang had not collapsed, it could be confirmed that Qing Xian had not been planted by the yin-yang Dao Master's golden immortal. It was not easy to reach this step based on one's own understanding. It also proved Qing Xian's ability in this aspect. His current situation had openly broken free from the constraints of the alliance of the three pristine orthodoxy. He had basically given up on his immature heavens trial. Of course, there were still a few people in Huanglong who specialized in the heavens trial Dao. It did not affect Lu Xiaoyi's protection. Now he was in the top 10, but he might not be in the top 10 forever. When the Dao of yin-yang collapsed, there would definitely be other yin-yang Dao steels that would emerge as a new force to be reckoned with. He was a cultivator who had fused with the celestial seed, so his competition would still be very intense in the future. Unless he also fused with the Dao of yin-yang fragments, what would the arrogant Qing Xian choose? This kind of thing could not be persuaded. Persuade him to give up on himself and focus on Dao? Or persevere even if he failed? Neither was suitable. This kind of thing could only follow one's heart. It should not even be asked. Qing Xian was well aware of the key point. It was a cultivator's self-cultivation. Fusion was cultivation, and he would not become another Qing Xian. He would still be their friend. Even if he did not fuse, it was still cultivation, and he might not necessarily succeed. This was a path that belonged to him alone. Outsiders would not be able to decide. Lu Xiaoyi only had to pay attention to, because he had gone against the arrangements of the three pristine alliance. Would he be punished for acting on his own? Qing Xian was a proud person. She rarely mentioned this kind of problem, so Lu Xiaoyi had long ago handed this task to Shi. The internal affairs of the Dharma cultivators were always better informed than outsiders. Among the top 10, there was another person that Lu Xiaoyi was familiar with, the Southern Elephant Heaven Thunderbolt Prince Hong Tiangang, the successor of the Tao of Thunder who was close to Bamboo Hat. His Dao Qi was similar to Qing Xian's, but considering that the thunder had already collapsed, this person might have already fused with the Dao of Thunder fragment. Even with such an advantage, he was still on par with Qing Xian. It was clear that his potential was lower than Qing Xian's. Whether or not he had fused with the Dao of Thunder fragment, this was a cultivator's core secret. Outsiders had no way of knowing, but if one took into account the fact that Hong Tiangang and his old partner Bamboo Hat parted ways on the splitting of Heaven's selection, the conservative tendency was very obvious. Then there was a high possibility that he had fused with the Dao of Thunder fragment. To Hong Tiangang, he was already close to his limit, but to Qing Xian, he still had potential. This was the difference between them. Among the top 10, only the 3 of them belonged to the first batch of evildoers of the interior realm. In fact, there were also a few outstanding figures in this batch. For example, the Nirvana Prince Xingjuan Seng, the Destruction Prince Duan Li, the Rooster Crowing Prince San Gung, the Unconcealable Prince Jinyao, the Dendrobium Prince Yi Curtin. These people were basically hovering around the top 50, sometimes a few places up, sometimes a few places down. It was not fixed. Lu Xiaoyi was very clear about their thoughts. In fact, they were the same as him. They had not really started to show their true strength. They still had reservations about the most core, the most crucial, and the most novel parts of their Tao tablets. They would preserve their final push until the last moment when the bayonet saw red. But the way he exerted his strength was not the same as the others. He fiercely pulled out the sword Tao tablet, but in fact, he exerted his strength on the devouring, the heavenly punishment, and the new reincarnation. Each had its own wonders. It was just that his fake fight became a real fight. This was something that he did not expect. Chapter 2463. The bamboo hat escape. He was even further behind. Originally, he was just like Lu Xiaoyi's sword Dao Steel, still lingering around the top 100. Now, the sword Dao Steel shot up like a rocket, yet he was still the same, still busy with the matter of Heaven's Choice Continents division, also able to remain calm. Not in a hurry, not in a hurry. His escape one was prepared to replace the innate Tao, just like Lu Xiaoyi's Tao of Balance. But in this aspect, Tao of Balance wasn't as good as escape one. The main reason was that Lu Xiaoyi really couldn't find the time. He might be a god in the future, but he wasn't one yet. He already had 4 innate Taos in mind, and he still wanted a 5th? One couldn't be too greedy, one had to know what to give up and what to do. Bamboo Hat's escape one was indeed very miraculous. One could see that he was deeply immersed in this aspect. Especially when he mixed in the essence of the Tao of Nothing, this was something Lu Xiaoyi didn't expect. It wasn't that he couldn't compete, but that he didn't have the strength. There would always be regrets in life, not everything could be perfect. Such a good Tao, how good would it be if he could give it to a true friend? But this wasn't something he could decide. Even among his friends, he couldn't find someone who could do this. After immersing himself in the Tao until now, he already had a deep understanding of the so-called balance of Heaven's Tao. From the perspective of Heaven's Tao, no matter who it was, if you went up for a competition, you couldn't be the judge anymore. Similarly, if you worked hard to subvert, you couldn't decide on balance, or else heaven would be surnamed Lu. Lu Xiaoyi was prepared to subvert, so the one in charge of balance would definitely be his opponent. This was the true balance. At least, Bamboo Hat was an opponent he was familiar with? At least, he knew how to compromise, how to coexist. They were opposing each other, but also supporting each other, just like the two sides of the character person. Therefore, balance was getting further and further away from him. This wasn't something he could decide. Shi's life Tao was hovering around the top 100. Seeing that this guy wasn't in a hurry, Lu Xiaoyi didn't know what to ask. One couldn't underestimate the foundation of a veteran Taoist like Wushang, but if she really planned to rush into innate first, then Hotian, this kind of result wasn't bad? Goals, anyone could set a bigger goal, but if one ignored the success rate and talked about the ambition of establishing Tao, then it would be a hooligan. There were only a few dozen innates, and most of them would eventually turn into a pile of yellow soil. Smokey's Great Tao of Youth was ranked even lower, around the 200th rank. If one only considered the goal of attaining the Hotian Great Tao, such an achievement was actually not bad. There were only a few dozen spots for Golden Immortals, but there were over 1,000 for Human Immortals and True Immortals. Those ranked in the top 1,000 all had a very high chance of becoming immortals. There were still a lot of friends that he didn't have the time to talk about them one by one. Talking about them now was actually a little redundant. It didn't represent the final result at all. Just like in his previous life, until the last second at the end of the month, you actually didn't know who would win or lose. The true decisive power would only be exerted at the last moment to play the role of turning the situation around. No matter if it was real or fake, or if it was crooked or evil, there was one point that was eliminated to the lowest level. The predetermined one was the invisible hand behind the scenes. What made Lu Xiaoyi laugh was that he didn't seem to have any mortal enemies since he started cultivating. Even his opponents on the surface, such as the Bamboo Hat and the Marching Monk, were on his side. This was the biggest difference between him and Li Wuyao after thousands of years of doing things. But he was also very clear that there was no mortal enemy to speak of. It was also possible that everyone who didn't stand on his side was a mortal enemy. What do you think? You're now smiling proudly at the heroes, the only one who reigns supreme. Taoists stood side by side with him in the sword Dao Steel, looking around at the spectacular scene of Dao Steels. Not much. It's just that it's a bit lonely at the top. I wonder how many more days I can stay cold? Look at those innate Tao steels, they're already impatient and are attacking me. It looks peaceful, but I don't know how many people are secretly scolding me for disrupting the order of Tao establishment. Lu Xiaoyi, as always, pretended to be arrogant. There was no need for false modesty. It wasn't easy to stand at the top, so why not take this opportunity to show off? Taoists laughed loudly. One must enjoy life to the fullest. Others only dare to criticize in their hearts, but you, Lu Xiaoyi, are now scolding people. Who dares to take it? That's the difference. What are you dissatisfied with? Lu Xiaoyi sighed. When I was young, my elders often told me that if I wanted to scold someone, I had to name them. Otherwise, many people would take it as a personal attack. I've always adhered to this saying. If I scold someone, I have to name them, and if I scold someone, I have to be honest. But now, I find that I can't even find someone to nominate? The limited few have all become my own people? The more it's like this, the more frightened I am. Because every word you say will be taken as a personal attack by countless people. This is how it feels to stand at the top. Taoists narrowed his eyes. Soon, very soon, more and more immortals are coming down from above. There's not much time left. Those who premeditated are a bit better, but I'm afraid that there will be some who will cram for Buddha's feet at the last minute. Many of these immortals come down with their own abilities. Even if they don't have a future, if they can cause chaos, it'll be good for them. Guard C, I recognize that your battle strength is unparalleled in the lower realm, but your future opponents may not be pure lower realm cultivators. You have to be especially careful. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. How could he not know this? In fact, he had already experienced it once in Zhou Xian's Qingwei Immortal School. Although the puppet immortal seed didn't give him any real pressure in terms of strength, it was only because he was lucky enough to have the purple sword will. If he didn't have the inspiration to erect the sword will monument, he wouldn't have been able to break through the purple cheese defense in the ancient filthy earth. If he didn't have the sword will in Zhou Xian's core and could only rely on his flying sword, it would be hard to say what the final result would be. The puppet immortal seed thought that she had found the most suitable environment, and indeed relied on such an environment to kill 5 senior half-immortals in Zhou Xian. This was originally not within the scope of her abilities as a newly promoted half-immortal. However, all of her hopes had collapsed under the purple will of the sword. Ingrua's true body had exposed her true nature. This immortal seed should be one of the weaker ones among the lower realm immortals. Not only was she weak, but the puppet body she found was only a young spirit. This was why she didn't have any room to fight back in front of Lu Xiaoyi. However, the other immortals wouldn't make such a mistake. They would only be stronger, and the puppet body they found was also a lower realm half-immortal's body. The future wasn't optimistic. If there wasn't much difference in the body, the immortal seed's endless immortal methods would be enough to make Lu Xiaoyi suffer. This was the real content of Taoist's warning. He shouldn't be blinded by his invincible battle strength in the lower realm. The next opponent had changed. Chapter 2464. P.S. Thank you, my friends, for keeping Sloth in the top 100. I'll take it slow in the later stages of the book so that it doesn't collapse. I'll be worthy of all the help you've given me. Also, please guarantee the minimum monthly vote. Sloth thanks you all here. Lu Xiaoyi nodded to express his gratitude. Taoists didn't say much either. This swordsman had extraordinary talent in battle, but he didn't have the ability to guide him in specific aspects. As the two talked, Lu Xiaoyi looked at the half-dead Dao Qi crown on Taoist's Dao steel and couldn't help but ask, Old Sin, what's with your Dao? If you need help, I can help you push it. Oh no, push the steel? Taoist's Dao steel was the Dao of life and death, a very obscure Tao. Lu Xiaoyi wasn't sure if this was Daoist Sun's original Tao in the Immortal Court. Or was it a new Tao? This thing was indeed very suitable for his specific situation. If being banished from the Immortal Court was called withered, then returning to the Immortal Court was glorious. In fact, it was related to the Tao of nirvana, creation, life and death, nirvana, impermanence, and so on. It was obviously a post-celestial Tao. The theory of the Tao was very good, but for some reason, its Tao Chi crown was outside the top 1,000. It was only 100,000 feet long now, and it felt like it was half dead. Daoist Sun waved his hand. No need. My Tao is too obvious, and it's not suitable for the accumulation of popularity. Instead, it focuses more on the gains and losses of merit in the lower realms. Keep a calm heart and let the wind and rain come. He had nothing to hide from Lu Xiaoyi. He was his only friend in the lower realms for thousands of years, and they didn't have any Tao dispute. Immortals die with their Tao. In principle, it's impossible for them to become immortals with their original bodies. They can only rely on the Tao to avoid the attention of the heavenly Tao. This is a normal situation, but now that the epoch is changing, there's a possibility of abnormality. In the new epoch, it's hard to say if the heavenly Tao's memories still contain things from the previous epoch. The Immortal Court's understanding was that there might be a chance, but they couldn't allow you to act recklessly. There was no precedent for this. You could only grasp the situation yourself during this epoch change. My Tao is declining, not vanishing. Under normal circumstances, the limitation is that as long as I don't ascend to immortality using my original Tao, I should still have a chance. Therefore, I changed my great Tao to the great Tao of life and death. It also coincides with my experience and situation. In my situation, it's not suitable for me to play the leading role on the most dazzling stage. It's easy for me to be envied by the heavens. It's better for me to take the path of the Hotian Tao and see if I can pick up some scraps. He sighed. Every family has its own difficulties. Especially us immortals, it's very difficult. My great Tao is that in the future, as long as I don't take the wrong path and don't follow the wrong situation, following the success of the Heaven's Choice continent, there will naturally be a long-term advantage. Coupled with Hell's efforts, the netherworld and the mortal realm would be working together. They wouldn't seek to advance by leaps and bounds, but rather they would seek to penetrate the stone with constant dripping of water. Therefore, this old Taoist's hopes are all on you. No matter if it's Hell or Heaven's Choice, as long as one of them fails, you might still have a chance. Then, I'll completely hand it over. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. What's with this? He's still relying on me. He could only tell the truth. How can I be so confident? I'm just blindly charging forward. Old Sin, I'm afraid you're entrusting it to the wrong person. Daoist Sin was helpless. I knew you would say that. You're not going to hell, and Heaven's Choice doesn't care. You're just a hands-off shopkeeper. Little E, be more careful. There are still many people waiting for your sponsored partnership. Can't you be a little more serious? Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. If you're serious, you'll lose. Just treat it as a game and don't think too much. Anyway, there will be a lot of people losing, and you're not the only one. What's there to be afraid of? His tone was joking, but there was a reason behind it. The more you cared, the more frustrated you would be. This principle was not difficult to understand, but when it came to it, who could be calm? Not long after, a few months later, the Sword Tao tablet was pulled down from the top of the list. Then, one after another, it shook until it was about to fall out of the top 10, and became neighbors with Qing Xian's Yin-Yang tablet. Lu Xiaoyi saw through this process very clearly. In terms of popularity, he was the most popular person in the land of the Yellow Dragon. There was no doubt about that. However, the Tao Chi canopy of the Tao tablet did not only look at popularity, but also many other aspects. For example, the content of the Great Tao? Harmonizing with the heavens? The Sword Tao tablet was a tablet of will. Its content was nothing to write home about. If one were to describe it, it would be reckless. It might be very compatible with the trend of the new era, but it was too simple and straightforward. It did not seem to have a specific path of cultivation. Perhaps no one in the new era could lack this kind of will. However, the problem was that there was no way to use this kind of will to establish a sect. This was the shortcoming of the Sword Tao tablet. The heavenly Tao was fair, and there was no such thing as absolute suppression. Why don't we find more people to support you? She joked. He was the only one who came back. Once he came back, he came to the Sword Tao tablet to give advice. Instead, he did not ask about his own Tao tablet. To him, a steady stream was the main topic. Taoists had their own Taoists' patience. Lu Xiaoyi sneered, "When I injected the purple qi into the Sword Tao tablet, I did not think of suppressing the others. It was fine as long as I did not fall behind. That's all." However, the changes of the Sword Tao tablet were beyond my expectations. Since it is not a happy thing, there is no need to worry about it. Let it be. I am not fighting for the first place. Moreover, what's the point of being the first place now? He was not saying that the grapes were sour just because he could not eat them. There was one thing that he was very clear about. If at the last moment of the future era, only the Tao Qi canopy of the Tao tablet was seen, whether it was the Sword Tao tablet on the surface or the 3 Tao tablets in the dark, the Tao of nature would definitely be ranked in front, because they were the inextinguishable eternity. Even if humans were to die and all living things were to be exterminated, these Tao of nature would still exist. If one did not understand this principle and wanted to place his Tao above nature, he would not be a true cultivator. Before the appearance of humans, these Tao existed. After the extinction of humans, they still existed. Time, space, 5 elements, yin and yang, they were all eternity. Therefore, he did not even think of fighting for the first place. That was not an ambition, it was pure madness. He felt that being ranked in the top 10 was a little too much. What he wanted to change was the cultivation order of this universe's cultivation world, the cultivation order of humans and living things. He did not want to change the operating law of the universe. There was a big difference between these two. What he wanted to overturn was not the universe. Your Tao of life is not bad. If I were the Tao of heaven, I would give you a true immortal. She was speechless. You are not the Tao of heaven. So, can you stop talking about these useless stories? Moreover, with our relationship, are we not worth a golden immortal? Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. You have to know that the most boring life in this world is to lose your goal. Therefore, a true immortal is just right. Alright, tell me, what news did you bring me from Qingxian? You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.